My name is Jessica Payne. I'm Director of Community Programs at the Cleveland Metropolitan Bar Association, and I'm also the staff liaison to the Inclusion and Diversity Committee. I wanted to say welcome to our speakers today, and of course, our moderator, Ron Johnson, who's a past president of the Norman Escobedo Bar Association. We couldn't be more pleased to have you all here and talk about these very important topics about how best practices and moving forward for affinity bars to be the best that they can possibly be. The CMBA is incredibly proud to partner with the affinity bars locally. Just a word of housekeeping for our CLE purposes. If you are taking this presentation for CLE credit, you'll get a survey in your email following today's presentation. So if you would just take a couple of minutes to complete that, and we'll make sure that we get you your credit. With that, I would love to kick it over to Ron to introduce himself as moderator and introduce our first two speakers. Thanks everyone, and we're looking forward to a great program today.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I hope all can hear me just fine. If not, please mention it in the chat and I'll make the adjustment. But I am very excited to participate and moderate this particular session. My name is Ron Johnson. I am the Chief Ethics Officer at KeyBank and a prior president of the Norman S. Minor Bar Association. What I'm really excited about for this particular session is the fact that as a legal community, Cleveland has a very rich and diverse legal community, and it's to me, it's pretty nice when you have the affinity bars joining with the Metro Bar to talk about a really important topic. So this afternoon, we've got 3 different segments, 2 panel segments where the first panel, we're going to focus on leadership development and the affinity bars as a platform for leadership development. We've got Judge Adrian, retired Judge Adrian, who's going to be participating, and Brandolyn Cook, who is the Vice President of the Ohio Hispanic Bar Association. And then the second segment, we're going to be talking about best practices for strong bar organizations. Really excited for that panel. We're going to have Heather Zerke participating and Neil Baggett, who's the president of the Asian American Bar Association. And then the third segment, it's really focused on how do we care for our bar leaders. And I think Marlon Primes is going to be moderating that particular panel. So with that, what I'd like to do for this first 50 minutes or so is focus on leadership. And so I'm just going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves. So Brandolyn, if you don't mind starting with your introduction and just tell us a little bit about who you are and include how you got involved in the Ohio Hispanic Bar Association.
Sure, absolutely, thank you. So hello everybody, my name is Brandolyn Cook. I am a new associate at Lorenzen Law. We are an primarily immigration firm, but we handle other issues as well. I am a recent grad of Cleveland Marshall. I graduated in 2018, licensed November 2018, so a fresh lawyer, if you will. I became acquainted with the Ohio Hispanic Bar Association through my time as a member and a president of the Hispanic Law Student Association. I was the vice president on my 2L year, the president my 3L year, and that is how I came to know Pat Espinosa, my boss and president of the Ohio Hispanic Bar Association. So he was doing some recruiting at Cleveland Marshall and Case with the local law schools to see who was interested in engaging with the Hispanic Bar Association and getting our involvement numbers higher as they were kind of dwindling before. So that's how I became involved, and I hope to take us into the future and get more engagement and involvement and hopefully grow as an organization and as a affinity bar member.
Excellent. Thank you, Brandolyn. Common story about young attorneys getting involved in bar associations. So we're definitely going to focus on that as part of this panel. So the man who probably needs no introduction, but I'm going to ask to introduce himself regardless, would be retired Judge Adrian. So Judge Adrian.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Ron Adrian, and I am, as Ronald's pointed out, currently minister without portfolio, and then I retired in January of 2018 from the Cleveland Municipal Court bench, where I spent the bulk of my career as a judge, a total of 36 years in that position, the last 9 of which I spent as the administrative and presiding judge of that court. I have the distinction of being the first president of the Norman S. Minor Bar Association and one of its primary founders. And at the time that we formed the Norman S. Minor Bar Association, I was 34 years old. So it's back before time and dirt. Okay, that I did that, and so I can only underscore what Brandolyn and Ron have said as it relates to bar associations basically being a young person's game. It's usually the younger people within the affinity segments who have both the energy and the time. Well, maybe not the time so much. They make the time to do what needs to be done in order to advance the groups that they represent. And so that was the case with me for sure. When we came together, there was a need. It was the same kind of situation that Brandon was talking about with regard to the Ohio Hispanic Bar. That was the situation with the African American bar in Greater Cleveland. Also, there had been a serious diminution of activity amongst Black lawyers to the point where, as an organized bar, we were almost extinct. So when we came on the scene, that was the situation that we faced moving forward.
Thank you, Judge Adrian. And you kind of touched on the first question that I really wanted to pose to the two of you. So this is the Affinity Bar Summit, and affinity bars have distinct purpose and distinct meaning. But I'd like for both of you just to talk, to kind of set the foundation. Why is it important, or why are affinity bars important? What are some of the key things that you see as being really critical in having affinity bar organizations in the first place? So Judge Adrian, since you kind of started there, I'll let you start, and then Brandolyn, if you wouldn't mind following, I'd appreciate that.
Sure. So, a lot of times the question is asked, well, there's a bar for the majority community. Why do we need to break out into these affinity groups? It's like you're self-segregating. What's the purpose of having a separate bar association? You're all lawyers. We don't understand. And frankly, they don't understand in many instances why it's necessary for us to do this. And my general answer is to people who pose that question to me is that because your blues ain't like mine. And there are things that we encounter. There are things that we have to deal with as minority lawyers, regardless of what our affinity happens to be, that are separate and apart from the things that people in the majority community face and have to address. And having a group of us come together, first of all, to identify what those issues may be, because a lot of times it's very subtle what we're facing. And second of all, to be able to have the strength of numbers as we go forward, so that it's not just a single voice screaming in the wilderness, gives us the ability to actually make change on the benefit and for the benefit of the lawyers that we represent, and more broadly, the communities that we represent. And that, I think, is the primary rationale as to why we come together separately from the major bar, although I've always said that it is absolutely essential that the members of the affinity bars recognize that they also have a duty and obligation and a purpose for putting their feet under the table of the majority bar also to make a difference.
Thank you, Judge Adrian. Brandon, what would you add to that?
Well, I mean, he said it very well, so it's hard to add to that. But I mean, I think just along those lines, to provide a sense of camaraderie and a common ground or shared experience that a lot of us have. You know, we share the experience as lawyers, but our journeys to get there are quite different. So I feel like having that support system of, you know, what's understood doesn't need to be explained kind of feeling. I have found a lot of community and support within the organizations, and I feel like we are enriching ourselves, but we are also enriching the legal community as a whole when we are able to, as Judge Adrian said, have strength in numbers in that shared experience.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you both. I think great perspectives, and I agree wholeheartedly. So this segment really is going to focus a lot on leadership development. And what I like about this panel is we have, you know, seasoned individual. We have someone relatively, you know, new on the legal circuit, and we can kind of talk about leadership from both spectrums. So I'm going to start with you, Brandolyn, because you talked about your leadership role in law school as part of the Hispanic, you know, Law Students Association. But just give us a little bit of sense of, you know, you're now part of the Ohio Hispanic Bar, but you're not just a member. You're actually in leadership. Can you talk about how your leadership has been developed through your role with the Ohio Hispanic Bar Association, and how has that helped you in your practice? Maybe you can start by talking about that.
Sure. So how has it helped me develop my role as a leader? As a new lawyer, you know, we have a lot of responsibilities we carry, and that's just a part of the job. So I think that being able to compartmentalize those responsibilities and come to the role as a collaborator. I see leadership as not just follow me and do what I'm doing, but let's bring all of our heads to the table and collaborate. And for me, it's made me a better lawyer because that's kind of how I approach my issues and the cases that I encounter. I like to, you know, contact my mentors and see what would you do in this situation, and just fostering that collaborative environment and those relationships. I think that's what a true leader is and does. So for me, in my role as the vice president, I'm trying to not only get people interested in what we are doing and our mission as a whole, but also, you know, what are we doing for the greater community? Because I think that's also a question, as was already spoken about, kind of like a self-segregating aspect. It's not just what we're doing for the Hispanic community and the Hispanic lawyers. It's what can we do to better the greater good, if you will. And I see that that's my role as a leader, is to foster that that interest and to maintain that engagement for many years. So that's kind of how that's made me a better a leader and a better lawyer, just having that goal in mind that it's bigger than me. And you know, as long as we keep that mentality, you know, we can grow to something that's more sustainable.
Excellent, excellent. And would you say, Brandolyn, that your role as a bar leader has really kind of broadened your perspective about what it means to be a lawyer in this community, and then how to influence others?
Yeah, absolutely. I became a lawyer first and foremost to advocate for myself and my family. We don't have any lawyers in my family. I was the first lawyer. So that the advocacy aspect of it was something that was really true and important to me personally. But I feel like I also want to advocate for my community. You know, as I was saying, it's bigger than me, and this has shown me that you know, the work that we do is very important and impactful, and it's not lost on me the social change that we're forever a part of. So just continuing those conversations and bringing humanity as a part of the conversation, not just what's legally just, but what's morally just. I think that's something that I want to keep talking about.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. So Judge Adrian, I'm going to ask you a slightly different question, just about leadership. You've had the opportunity not only to start a bar association, but you've worked with several bar associations, you know, over years as a lawyer, as a judge, volunteer, et cetera. So I'd like for you to kind of talk about the Affinity Bar as a platform for leadership development. What have you seen? And you obviously use Norman S. Minor as a reference, or you can use other bar associations as a reference. What is your perspective about the Affinity Bar as a leadership development platform? What are some of the things that you think are best practices? And where do you see where Affinity Bars perhaps maybe even excel compared to a metro bar or a state bar or a national bar organization?
Well, let me start with something that Brandon said, which I thought was extremely important by making the point. And basically what it boils down to is that, as my dad taught me, that there's nothing wrong with doing well while doing good. Okay. And the more you're out in the community, the more the community gets to see you. And when I say you, I'm not just talking about an individual lawyer. I'm talking about a group of lawyers out doing things that are pro bono or are just beneficial. For instance, bringing suits on behalf of some segment of the community, or filing amicus briefs on behalf of some aggrieved party within the community. To the degree that you do those kinds of things, the community starts to look towards you as leaders and starts to think of you as the go-to organization when they have legal issues and problems. Sometimes those things are not financially remunerative in and of themselves, but down the line, they always have the probability of providing Black lawyers with having raised their profile, and other affinity groups having raised their profile to the point where when folks need a lawyer for something that is financially remunerative, they know that this particular lawyer that looks like them is competent. As you know, in our minority communities, unfortunately, a lot of times people don't think that we're as competent as people who are part of the majority. And so this gives us an opportunity to establish that. And so I think that that's one of the grounding characteristics of being in a minority bar, is to make sure that you are out front when it comes to things that are important to the community, because it's a two-way street. You do things for the community, and then the community does things for you. So I think that a lot of Black lawyers are so busy making money and trying to establish their careers that point gets lost. And I would imagine that the same is true for other affinity bar associations. They just don't think that they have the time to do this, when in reality, making the time to do it will actually enhance their career path. As a leader, I think I've seen individuals who have been active in not just the Norman S. Minor Bar Association, but other minority bar associations, learn leadership and people skills that really help them in their primary jobs and have caused other folks to see them as, again, competent leaders and people that they can turn to, people who they can depend on, people who get things done. And that has resulted, certainly with regard to the Norman S. Minor Bar Association, in a number of our members actually running for and achieving public office. So I think that as a leadership development platform, it's extremely useful. And this is probably not going to be exactly politically correct, and I hope that I don't get into trouble for saying it. But
Good thing you're retired, Judge.
yeah, I'm retired, so I'm like the 800-pound gorilla. There's not too much anybody can do to me or for me as long as it's not illegal, what I say. So, but the thing I was going to say is that working in our affinity groups, in many instances, is more difficult than working with majority groups.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you're working with folks who are your peers and who feel as though they're able to do it just as well as you are, learning how to navigate in those environments and to disagree without being disagreeable is one of the most beneficial things that I think leadership-wise that you pick up as an affinity bar leader.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's important. I think you're absolutely right. And Judge, one thing that you pointed out for us that I hadn't really thought about is there's a difference, I think, between organizational leadership, where the organization is viewed as a leader, through the bar association and through other activities, and then also the individuals who run that organization and their individual leadership skill. So thanks for making that distinction, because I think that's really important, that as an affinity bar, whether it's a affinity bar based on ethnicity or race, or an affinity bar based on a practice, you can have a family law affinity bar or something like that. The idea is to build competency and to become a thought leader and a leader in that particular area. So that's really important. So Brandolyn, just kind of thinking about, some of the leadership development opportunities, when you think about yourself and you think about your peers, as Judge Adrian said earlier, sometimes, bar work is, the young lawyers' work, because that's where the energy is. But, you have to manage a practice. You're starting out in your practice, you have obligations. Can you talk a little bit about some of the leadership attributes that you think you've developed as a result of your current role, and perhaps what you see in your peers that you may not have gotten otherwise? Can you talk a little bit about that and how you developed some of those skills? What were those skills and how did you develop them?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, I consider myself intellectually curious. So I think that this was a role that I was excited about, because I felt like I could garner so much knowledge from various individuals by lieu of their membership and just, as I mentioned before, collaboration. So I think that just wanting to learn more and engage with other people and learn about their experience and hopefully build my experience off of theirs really, I guess, fosters that sense of engagement.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I would say just being a socially conscious person is a quality that I consider I have, but that a affinity bar leader should also have and maintain, because being intellectually curious coupled with socially conscious, those are two attributes that will benefit any organization. And I think we don't have enough of that. I think that getting through law school and passing the bar, those are some of the hardest experiences that I've gone through intellectually thus far, but leaning on the organizations and the mentorship that I've gained throughout that really, I think, saved me through that experience and pushed me through. I think it could feel very isolating. So to have that support system, and just have that support saying that this is normal, and you will ultimately cross that finish line, and we will do it together, and you'll be a part of a legal community and a family where you can grow in your want to learn about the law, and how it affects the community at large. So I'd say that those attributes will lead to success in wanting to lead a bar, because if you're not hungry for that kind of knowledge or that kind of experience, then it's probably not for you, because it is a time commitment. You do have to carve out time for this. So if it's something that you don't necessarily want to do, or you're not interested in, and you don't have your heart in it, then it's going to show. The work is the production rate will reflect that. So those are the attributes I think that I came in with, and the role has continued to develop those, because I feel like I'm sharpening those skills weekly.
Okay. Are there new skills that you didn't think that you had before that you've developed currently? Can you talk a little bit about that, if that's applicable to you?
Yeah, skills that I've gained through the role would be trying to pinpoint areas where we could do better and be, I guess, more involved in partnerships within the affinity bars. I think that COVID has kind of thrown a wrench in that, but just being more present and have our feet on the ground instead of a bird's eye view. I think it's important to be in the mix and like in what's going on, so that we are current and relevant at what the issues are at that time. I mean, we know that there are like underlying issues that are pervasive and that will continue. But something that I have gained through this role is just being more engaged and more involved. And I think I could do better, at that. And I think we all, we continue our self-development journeys as lawyers, but as individuals, there's nothing but positive action that can be gained from that.
Excellent. Thank you, Brandolyn, for that self-reflection. It's really important, I think, for the participants to hear. And so the next question for both you and Judge Adrian, I'm going to start with you, Brandolyn, since you've got some good momentum here. How do we attract, or how do we attract more people to aspire to bar leadership in the Affinity Bar? When I think back to my own experience, how I became a bar leader, it wasn't something that I aspired to do. A lot of people were in my ear talking to me about it, and ultimately I did, and it was a great experience, right? But how do we get more people to think about it from a development perspective, so that we can keep things moving? Do you have any thoughts about that? And then Judge Adrian, after Brandolyn, if you can respond, that would be great.
So personally, it's interesting you say you never aspired to the roles, because I wouldn't say that I aspired to be a leader either. I don't consider myself a leader, but maybe that's a good thing in a sense that I'm not, power hungry, or some people just hear of the leadership roles and they're like, oh, I know why they want to do that. But for me personally, Pat, who is my boss and is the president of the Ohio Hispanic Bar Association, he approached me when I was the president of the Hispanic Law Student Association, and he said, I think that you would be great in the organization and continuing to grow us. And I feel like I have good people skills, and I was in the restaurant industry for almost a decade. So I feel like that's where I learned all my soft skills. And I think that that connection and that environment to just engage and be a part of a group, that's what drew me to the organization, and then I guess kind of naturally into a leadership position. How do we get people to want to be a leader? I think that it's a hard question, because I think if you just ask somebody, hey, do you want to lead this organization? It might throw them off of it. Like, no, that just sounds like too much responsibility. But ultimately, I think that if we speak about the positives of not necessarily just the responsibilities that come along with it, but the positive experience, and as Judge Adrian alluded to, basically the elevation of our careers that this could do for us, I think that that's very important. Because I mean, coming from where I came from with no lawyers to look up to when I was younger, being the only lawyer in my family, I didn't even think becoming a lawyer was an option, let alone being a leader in the legal community. So I think sometimes we have to remind ourselves that these options are available to us if we seek them out, or at least keep an open mind when we are sought out for these opportunities. I know that it's easy to just close the door, or at least just say, no, I don't have time right now. I'm sorry, I'll think about it. And before you know it, you've lost that window of opportunity where you could have really made an impact. So for me, I try to keep an open mind for opportunities. And that's how I approach people about joining the organization and possibly elevating themselves within the organization. Just keep an open mind. And yes, it's a lot of work, but I mean, anything that's worth it, right, is going to be a lot of work. So just kind of pitching it with that twofold mentality in mind is kind of how I would try and recruit leaders to our Affinity Bar.
Excellent. Thank you, Brentwood. And before I turn it over to Judge Adrian to respond, I just want to let the participants know, I know I'm asking a lot of questions. We are going to make time for questions for Q&A in the next several minutes here. So feel free to put questions in the chat so that we can respond to those at the appropriate time. Judge Adrian?
So I think that this is really a central question, and it's a difficult one to know exactly what the answer is. I would say to you that the organization recruits leaders when it's functioning well, okay? Because when you have a organization that's doing well, everybody wants to be on the bandwagon. Unfortunately, these organizations have a tendency to ebb and flow as far as, when they're doing well and when they're not. And that has an awful lot to do with whoever is the leader. So it's sort of like a chicken and egg kind of situation. One of the things that I think that we did well when we first started the Norman S. Minor Bar Association is that we looked around at things that our predecessor organizations had done well, and then we tried to replicate those. And then we also added a few other things that they hadn't thought about doing, and we tried to do those well by recruiting people who had a particular passion for a particular issue. And then once you get people in and you've gotten them in because of the fact that they wanted to do something in particular, then you start to groom them for leadership of the organization more generally. And if they feel as though they have done something important, then they may be more open to doing something else, because all of us like to get things done. And if we see that this organization allows us to get things done, then we are prone to continue on that path. You know, one of the good things that I saw about the time that you were coming in, Ron, into the Norman S. Minor Bar Association is that we were starting on an uptick. We had identified a good leader before you, and some of the people who were part of that administration had started to look around to identify other people that they thought had leadership skills and to try to, apply gentle pressure relentlessly to get those folks to come on in so that they could take on leadership spots. And ever since that role started, more emphasis has been placed on succession, because the worst thing that can happen for the Bar Association is to select somebody who is not a good leader, because it only takes one term and certainly two terms when your leader is not effective for the whole organization to fall apart. Because those of us who have sat in the chair recognize that everybody has good intentions, but the only way things move forward is if the person who is in the chair keeps his or her size 9s or size 7s dead up everybody else's butt to make sure that things move. It's an essential for affinity leadership that the leader recognize that even though you're dealing with a group of professionals, that when it comes to their volunteer efforts, that they're going to need motivation and incentivizing. And at the end of the day, no matter who it is, no matter what we're talking about, it's always, at least in some measure, what's in it for the person that you're asking to do something. Because if they don't see anything in it for themselves personally, they're not going to be particularly prone to meet deadlines or to do the other things that need to be done in order to move your organization forward.
I think that's a great point, Judge, and actually it kind of segues into the next question, which is exactly about succession, right? So when we think about leadership, every person is going to bring their own. They're going to manifest leadership in different ways. There's no such thing as a clone. Everyone's going to have their own passion. I'm not sure how the other bar associations operate, but I'm certain that their bylaws. Everyone's bylaws calls for elections. Maybe even open nominations, that sort of thing. But there are people who are actively engaged. There are others who aren't actively engaged. But at some point in time, you kind of have to see who's got the leadership ability to take the organization to the next level. What are those particular leadership attributes? And so I'm just curious, Brandon, if you have any thoughts about how to do that, and is that something that is formalized with the Ohio Hispanic Bar, or do you have a perspective about that? And then for you, Judge Adrian, just talk about what you've seen, like what works, what doesn't work. What should all of these participants who are presumably leaders in affinity bars, what should we be thinking about when it comes to succession?
So as related to if it's formalized in an agreement, I think that within the Ohio Hispanic Bar Association, since there was stagnancy for a while, and basically, as Judge Adrian put it, almost extinction with the lack of the membership, I do think that it's something we should revisit, because clearly if it is formalized, it hasn't been implemented. So in order to have a sustainable organization, you're right, the succession plan is key. We all have a expiration date, if you will, and I think that some roles run their course. So as for grooming individuals to take over, I think that that's something that we need to have at the forefront of our minds at all times. Because, for example, this week, my boss, Pat, he just had a baby, you know, and that's something that you just can't, your life is going to bring you those situations where you need someone to step in and help out, and that's kind of what I am for him. But at the same time, do we have a sustainable succession plan? I wouldn't say that's the case. So I think that that's something that we need to revisit, because who knows where 2-3 years down the line any of us will be, and we want to make sure that our work is not for naught, and that our efforts do continue on, you know, outside of us as individuals. So I think that's a great point, and something that we need to revisit and bolster ourselves.
Excellent. And, you know, Brandon, there were a couple of things that you said that, you know, I wrote down that are key leadership attributes, at least from your perspective, about, you know, people who are intellectually curious, socially conscious. They've got the, you know, influencing skills to kind of move things and attract members and encourage engagement, right? So like those are attributes.
Right.
If you find people with those attributes, those are people that we should be talking to about future leadership, not making promises or commitments, but really gauging interest and then providing opportunities for them. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. Excellent. Okay, Judge Adrian? You're on mute. You're on mute, Judge Adrian.
Sorry. I don't think that there's any way to formalize the process of succession planning. I mean, it's got to be something that you build into your culture. You can't have rules for it. That's just not going to work. You have to be constantly kind of plumbing the depths of your organization to find people who have those skills, and then putting them in positions where you can observe their ability to work. Okay. Because that really is, at the end of the day, the proof of the pudding. You know, you may think that somebody would be a good leader, but you got to be able to put them in a position where you can see whether they really and truly can be. You have to see whether or not they're dependable. You have to see whether or not they work well with others. You have to see whether or not they have that intellectual, you know, curiosity and the innovative and creative sides that will allow the organization to grow. You got to see whether or not they have the ability to be out front on behalf of the organization and to be able to represent it. All of those are things that you have to be looking for all the time. And the top leadership in the organization, including the folks who have had leadership positions in the past, need to be constantly looking for who's going to be the next cadre of folks to lead the organization. At the point that you fail on that, that's when somebody whose only desire is to have the title steps into a leadership spot. And when that happens, things go completely to heck, you know. And we have those situations that arise, but they're less likely to arise when there is an intentionality about making sure that it's not that people just get into the rotation and rotate up to the top. We're actually looking at every time that there is a change in leadership for the best person to be able to take that job and to take the organization to the next level. Okay.
And I think that's important. And so I'm going to ask this question that might sound silly, but you know, who is responsible for selecting and those leaders in the succession plan? Is it the current officers? Is it the executive board? Is it the membership? I know the easy answer is it's a combination of everybody, but in reality, in practice, like who's ultimately responsible for that succession?
I think it's different in every organization.
Okay.
You know, some organizations that may be well established and have a deep bench of people who have done, really solid leadership, can provide guidance to the current leadership about people that they see coming up, and that current leadership is willing to accept that guidance. In other organizations where the leadership may not be as well established, you may have situations where the current leadership itself is going to have to be the ones who identify the up and comers and put them in a position where they can develop them, further and get them to the point where they're ready to lead when the opportunity presents itself.
Brandolyn, do you have a perspective about that?
I don't think there's anything really that I could add to that. Judge Adrian has the experience in, starting the Norman S. Minor Bar Association, as well as putting in place that succession plan it seems it has worked. So he's right. I think for us, we don't necessarily have a deep bench that we can look towards. So it's a little harder because we are those people. But I think that you are right in saying that it is a combination of all of those people that will lead us to success. Because if I speak to somebody, and I am sure that they could add value to our organization, I will go to Pat and say, hey, we should, discuss this further with them. And he is the same way. But we do rely on those relationships and the word of mouth, people that are in the institutions at the law schools. I think that's a way that we're able to, go about succession planning and recruiting, is starting, with the next generation of lawyers. But I personally haven't been in that position yet to have to put together a succession plan, but I know that I'm a part of it just by my role. So I'm kind of learning as I go.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. So just a reminder to the participants that, if there are questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. Before we go, we know that Brandolyn's got a hard stop in about 7 minutes or so. So we're going to release her for her duties. But before we open it up to questions, is there a question, Brandolyn and Judge Adrian, that I didn't ask that you were hoping that I would ask?
Well, I think you covered everything.
I tried to be thorough, but you never know. What about you, Judge Adrian?
I think you've done good, Ron. I think you've done good.
All right, excellent. I can come up with more questions, but I want to make sure we give the participants an opportunity to ask questions. I don't see any questions in the chat. Looks like there might be a comment. One last call for a question, otherwise I'll just jump to another question. All right, so this is probably more of a question for Judge Adrian. So we kind of talked about succession planning and the importance of it, but from your experience and what you've seen, again, using any of your experiences as a reference, what are some of the true pitfalls if we don't do that, if we don't get that right?
Yeah.
What are the pitfalls? I mean, at the end of the day, we all want to survive as organizations and maintain relevancy, but if we don't get it right, what happens?
So I took over, or not took over. We started the Norman S. Minor Bar Association in 1980. Okay, and that because of the way that we started it, my presidency extended for a year and a half, and then after that, the rotations were supposed to be a year each, and so I had a good year and a half, and we got a lot of things done. We did things like standing up Operation Greater Cleveland Big Vote, which was an attempt to try to get the Black community to participate in the 1980 election by engaging with a lot of different other organizations and volunteers. But basically, the Northern Nevada Minor Bar Association was the driving force behind that. We had initially, when we first started, about 20 separate committees, and all of them were active during that time frame, which when I look back at it is pretty remarkable in and of itself. Although I have to say, you know, just like we were saying earlier, there were times when I would have to get behind some of the committee chairs just to find out what the heck they were doing. And we had a newsletter that we put out 3 times a year, and a couple of times during my time, I actually got the information from the chairs because we were on deadline. I ended up writing the committee a report, you know, and there were things like that, you know, that I had to do as a president, but, you know, that got it done. So the way we were structured at that time, we had a president and we had a president-elect status. So the person who was elected president-elect was a really good guy, somebody I liked an awful lot, somebody that I thought was a perfect person to succeed me as the president of the association. But when we transitioned, it didn't work out really well because his opinion was that he was the leader of a group of professionals who knew what time it was. They knew what to do. And so he didn't feel that he was obligated to, you know, do the grunt work of actually making sure that the trains ran on time. And he didn't do that. And so as a result, a lot of the committees fell into disrepair and weren't functional. And that was a really bad year. Fortunately, the person who succeeded him recognized what needed to be done and brought it back up. But then we had a series of up and down kind of situations. And then we had one block where we had good people for a sustained period of time. And we did really well during that time frame. And then we hit another dry spot. We had a series of people who basically were looking at the Northern Nevada Minor Bar Association as a political stepping stone. And we had folks who successfully made it to political office, partially because of the fact that they had been part of the Northern Nevada Minor Bar Association, which by that time had established a reputation. So I'd say that the thing that you have to be mindful of is that there's, like I said, there's nothing wrong with doing well while doing good, but at the same token, your primary goal should be to do good. Okay.
Got it.
And if somebody is in it for the wrong reason, you know, that's the kind of thing that can run your boat up on the shore.
Okay. So I want to make sure, Brandon, if there's any last comments that you wanted to make before you departed. And we do have a couple of questions in the chat that I think we can we can have Judge Adrian respond to.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss these important issues that we face today and we will continue to face. I think that just staying engaged in these affinity bars and just engaged as a lawyer with other lawyers is truly important. You know, we're not an island out on our own, and I think that this to me helps with that isolating feeling sometimes that it's just us against the world, and it's really not. We can find this camaraderie and community together. So for me, I think it is a benefit. Yes, it is a lot of work, but I think that the work is well worth it, and it pays dividends, down the line. So if anyone's considering joining their affinity bar or seeking out a leadership position, please do so. We need more people that are hungry for those kinds of opportunities. So just being here a part of the CLE shows that that commitment to to engagement. So I applaud you for that.
Thank you, Brandolyn.
Thank you.
Thanks for your participation and your insights.
Bye,
Thank you.
Brandon.
Thank you. Bye, Judge. Have a good day.
You too.
So in the last couple of minutes here, a couple of questions that came in, and you kind of started on this path, so we'll continue. One question is really about, difficult conversations where someone initially gets involved, but they don't really apply the effort necessary to carry forward. What's been your experience there? And then the second question is just your perspective about whether or not affinity bars should get into what our role should be in the fight for voting rights. So if you can talk about those two topics, that would be appreciated.
As a leader, you have an obligation when someone is not performing, either to try to get them up to speed, and if that doesn't work, to replace them. And those difficult conversations are ones that nobody ever likes to have, particularly when you're dealing with volunteers, because you're getting exactly what you're paying for, right? So the possibility of having somebody not performing is greater than if you are in a situation where you're paying them and you can demand that they perform. But you have to have that conversation, and you have to try to have it in the most circumspect and politic way. But if at the end of the conversation, the last part of that conversation is, I'm going to have to replace you, then you have to do that. And you have to be strong enough to do that. It's just a sign of good leadership. With regard to the second question, as it relates to voting, the most important thing that's happening in this country as we speak is the assault on the right to vote. Every affinity bar, every Black lawyer, every Hispanic lawyer, every Asian Pacific Islander lawyer in this country needs to recognize that if the assault on our rights to vote and on a democracy succeed, that all of us are going to be locked on the outside of the process. We will not be able to prosper.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Judge. Thank you, Judge.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's all the questions that we have. That's actually all the time that we have. We thank Brandolyn for her participation. Judge, we thank you for your participation, and thanks for the participants for the questions. Certainly hope that everyone found this particular panel insightful. I know that I did. And so with that, we will go ahead and end this panel. For those of you who are just tuning in, my name is Ron Johnson, moderating this next panel, which is really focusing on Affinity Bar Leader best practices. So joining us today on the panel, we've got Neil Bagat, President of the Asian American Bar Association. Hopefully I said that right. Give me a thumbs up if I did. All right, outstanding. And then Heather Zerke, who is General Counsel of the Cleveland Metro Bar. I'm just pleased to work with both of these fine folks. I've got a number of questions that I'm going to be asking as moderator. We will leave time toward the end for questions from the audience. Feel free to throw your questions in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer all those questions. So with that, I am going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves, and just tell us a little bit about yourselves, including your practice areas and how you became involved with your respective bar associations. So Heather, we'll start with you.
Thanks, Ron. I'm so glad to be part of this panel. Glad to be with you and with Neil. Again, I'm Heather Zerke. I'm General Counsel for the CMBA. I've been with the CMBA in July. It will be 16 years. I started out as Assistant Bar Counsel. I joined the CMBA in 2005. Doing grievance work, and then became bar counsel, and in the last year or so was promoted to general counsel. So I'm so proud to be part of the CMBA team and the great work that the CMBA is doing. I'm passionate about bar association work and all of the ways that the CMBA is making touches inside and outside of the legal community. And I love that the affinity bars are coming together in this way. I think it dispels the myth that we are all competing with each other. I think coming together like this is so important, gives us an opportunity to learn from each other and to grow our respective organizations.
Thank you, Heather. Neil?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Neil Bagat, and I'm the current president of ABA for short. Professionally, I'm an in-house attorney. I'm an employment attorney over at Progressive, and I've been there for a few years. Prior to that, I practiced at a mid-sized firm downtown doing employment work. I've been involved with affinity bars for a long time, all the way back to law school. I was part of and a leader of our student organization, and if you listen to the last presentation, I think you'll hear that's a pretty common theme and a pretty good feeder for our organizations is getting involved at the law school level. After law school, I then became involved with the South Asian Bar Association of Ohio. That is an organization with a statewide focus, but is under the umbrella organizationally of ABA. And so at that time, I started as a leader there, became the president there, and served in a presidential role there for some time. After that, I transitioned to become the president of ABA, and I've been the president for the last few years. This is my last year. We've got a fantastic young group of attorneys who are ready and I think primed to take action and kind of move the organization forward. Just briefly, Ron, if I could share a little bit about ABA. Formally, we were organized in 1992, though there were informal gatherings prior to that. And if we ever get a chance to catch up in person, anyone here, I'm happy to kind of share some of the stories that I've heard over the years. But like all affinity organizations, I think, we have periods of dormancy and we have periods of activity. And those are things that we've worked through through the years. But really, our organization is an association of lawyers, some law students, and really focused on the interests of our members. We also do look at community interests as well. Of course, there are many effective community advocates, and our lane really is the intersection of law and where it affects the community. And that's where we really try to focus on taking an active role. So how does this really manifest itself? Education, CLE panels just like this one. We have meetings when we could in person, happy hours, mentorship programs. There's been different tangible outcomes that have come out through the years. It just really, in some ways, depends on the membership and the board at the time in terms of where we like to focus our priorities.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you both for those introductions. And This segment is real. So the last segment, we kind of focused on leadership development and Affinity Bars as a development platform. This segment is really focused on, how do we strengthen the organization itself? And so it's really about the organizational leadership, if you will, and organizational efficacy. But before we did that, both of you had a chance to listen in the last panel, and I just didn't know if there were any additional insights or thoughts about leadership development that you wanted to comment on that would sort of set the stage for this next segment. And if there isn't any, don't feel obligated. I just wanted to give you the opportunity. Okay, fair enough. So with that in mind, we're going to talk about the effectiveness of organizations. And so I want to start with the basic question for both of you, and we'll start with you, Neil, and then ask Heather to jump in. But what would you say are sort of the key foundational elements of a good, strong bar association, regardless of size?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think number one for us is communication. And I know that's obvious, but literally a platform to communicate both with your members and with your board, and do it effectively and in a way that keeps things organized and moving is very, very important. And that's not a skill I had when I became the president. I did not appreciate the value of good communication. I've tried to work on that over the years, and the good thing about communication is you'll learn if you're not doing it right. People will let you know. So, that's a learning lesson. And I think a lot about becoming a leader here, and I know that was what the judge was talking about, is developing your own leadership skills and pulling out from that. But in terms of the organization, I think there's a couple things that have helped us specifically. One of them is taking advantage of just some of the basic technologies that are available that have made things easier. So scheduling, like Doodle, is amazing. Trying to coordinate calendars with our board is, I think, 13 lawyers right now. Trying to schedule that is impossible. So Doodle is probably the best thing that we use. Google Documents, literally collaboration on public statements, things like that is very, very important for us to kind of make sure everyone can get their input and do it quickly and effectively. I would encourage all the other affinity organizations, just like we are, to try to strive for paperless as much as you can. It is helpful because it's the history of the organization all kept in one place, and trying to maintain those records so that we're not reinventing the wheel down the line is very important. One example that came up is, a few years ago, two of our members had put together a mentorship program, and they did a great job of putting together all the work, all of the forms to do it. And we launched it and we had a great year. But in between, there was a gap. We just weren't able to continue the program. But we're in the position right now where we have a good membership base that we can reactivate that program. And luckily, because we're able to pull back those records and pull back everything, it's going to make it a lot easier, not as much of an uphill climb. One other foundational item that I think has been helpful for me personally is finding a good membership management sort of platform or software. So we did some study on that. We ended up with a platform called, I think, Brilliant Directories. What's nice about this is there's a lot of these tools, but keeping things in one place as much as you can is very helpful, particularly for managing the roles. What was helpful for me is, we are a volunteer-run organization, so we have limited time. And so some of the automation tasks, sending the welcome emails, making it easy to communicate to your members, the more you can leverage your software for that, the better. And I think that also helps give you some data to figure out where's your organization at, where do you need to go forward, and really trying to identify who has left the organization that you should make sure that you're bringing back from a retention perspective.
Great, thanks a lot, Neil. Heather?
I think that beginning with your governance structure, looking at your structure as an organization, and really starting with the rules. I'm a rules kind of person. I live in the rules. And so if you are a bar leader and it's been a while since you have looked at your governing documents, I recommend really going through those, putting together a small group that can look at your rules. Do they need to be updated? Do your rules reflect what your current practice is. Are you doing all of the things that your rules require? It never fails when I walk through committee bylaws or whatever it is with our committee members. There are things that we are not doing that we're supposed to do under our rules. So making sure that your rules are in order, not to mention all of your books and minutes and things like that. I love Neil's point about just going paperless. You can have all of those things in a paperless format. And Neil, you really blew my mind. The idea of circulating public statements in a Google Doc is so stupid simple, and something that we don't do as an organization. It's really tough, and maybe we'll talk about it later, but you have unique individuals who come together as members of a bar association. When the bar association wants to speak, it's a difficult thing, and agreeing on the words that you're going to put out there to the public is a difficult thing. And so we have countless emails that go around when we're trying to decide what our statement is going to be. But that goes into Neil's point about the importance of good communication, which of course is key. And leadership is essential to any organization. And I know they spent a lot of time talking about that in the first hour. But I encourage bar leaders to meet individually with the members of their board. There's so much to be learned about your members in these one-on-one meetings, learning about the strengths and the unique skills that your members bring to the organization. You probably have people in your group that are not going to be the first ones to speak in a board meeting, but that doesn't mean that they don't have ideas, and you need to look out for those people because sometimes the quiet people are actually going to be your leaders and need some encouraging. So developing those relationships with the people on your board and having those one-on-ones is so important. I also think that training your new people, that's something the CMBA is really big on. We have a new board of directors coming in, new board members that are going to be coming in, and we'll have multiple training sessions with them. They will learn about the CMBA's corporate structure, all of the things that we're doing about all of our programs. We want all of our board members to be singing the same song so that they can go out and really promote the work of the CMBA and be very familiar with all of the things that we're doing. So training is so key.
Thank you, Heather. And I want to just double click on that just for a second, because I kind of heard two things. There's training of leadership on really how to lead the organization. And then there's onboarding, which is the way I look at it, which is really making sure they really understand the organization itself, some of the history and that sort of thing. Did I get that right? Is that fair to say? I don't want to
Absolutely. I mean, just people come into the organization for different reasons and through different means. One member pulls in another member and they get engaged with a committee or a program. They may not be familiar with the mission of the bar association and the values of the bar association. Those things, you have to be intentional about teaching your leaders about the mission and values.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you for that. Neil, as I was listening to, the strategy that ABBA has employed around technology, it really kind of underscores a really important point that's going to move me into the next question here. And it's really about capacity and infrastructure support, right? So what I'm most excited about this today is the fact that we have the CMBA, a Metro Bar, who is sort of hosting this summit for other smaller bar organizations. But there's actually an MOU, there's actually a partnership that's been formalized between the CMBA and Affinity Bars to kind of help provide some infrastructure support. So the next question really has to do with, what are some of the things that you've done? I know, Neil, you started the conversation here, but let's talk about that partnership between CMBA and Affinity Bars in terms of infrastructure, office support, that sort of thing, and how has that made your organization stronger? So Neil, if you can start off with responding to that question, and then I'll ask Heather to kind of jump in and talk about it from a CMBA perspective.
Sure. Yeah, the memorandum of understanding is very, very important to us. There's some very specific benefits we've gotten out of it that were contemplated at the time. So this is a simple one, but you'd be surprised how helpful it is. A mailing address. Like we used to use a PO box, and our past president, Barbara Lum, who's done so much for our organization, would have to go down, like check it periodically and get it there. Just literally having a mailing address that the CMBA supports us by checking is just a practical thing that I appreciate. You know, the second thing is communications and amplifying them. The CMBA does a very good job of helping promote our events when we've requested, helping to amplify some of our public statements, and really just helps us ultimately get our name out there, which in turn ultimately leads to bringing members into the organization. The CMBA is the preeminent bar organization here. And so the fact that we are able to leverage our relationship in a positive way is very, very meaningful to us. And I think what I like about where the relationship has gone from when the MOU was signed a few years ago is it's led to collaboration in a formal way. Prior to the MOU, certainly the affinity bars worked together and they met together, but it was in an informal way. It sort of depended on the relationship of the leaders. What I like about the CMBA is that it's really structured. I mean, we meet periodically, you know, I think it's every month or every other month, but what you see in the byproduct of really two things that have happened here in recent times that I think kind of show where the MOU is working. So one, you know, I think as most people here are aware, you know, our community is suffering. I mean, there are real issues facing the Asian community right now that we are working through. And this has required our organization to step up in a way that I don't think we anticipated a few months ago. And I don't think we wanted to anticipate it, but sometimes important moments call for important action. And that's where our board has stepped up there. But it's not just within the board. And trust me, every single board member has gotten involved in their own way and offered their own expertise in what they can. But it's also the collaboration of our allies and the CMBA. So what the CMBA did is they took the lead on putting together a panel, finding a list, you know, helping to coordinate people, setting up a panel, a Zoom discussion, just like this, which really is critical. I mean, we would love to do as much programming as we can, but again, we're a volunteer organization, and having the infrastructure of people who do this all the time is very, very important for us and meaningful for us, particularly in a time when we need to move quickly. The CMBA and Jessica and Dominica were very easily able to kind of, well, I shouldn't say easily, but they were able to put everything together, corral a bunch of lawyers, which, trust me, I get it, and really kind of make things happen quickly and get our message out there. And we've gotten a lot of positive feedback about that presentation. I think another good example is really what's going on today with the Affinity Bar Summit. You're right, training new board members is critical. It is absolutely something that needs to do, that we need to do. And what I like about this is it's not only the experiences that I have that I can pass on to our members, whether they're watching today or they're watching the recording, but learning from everyone else's. I mean, hearing the judges' experiences is really interesting, and hearing how history repeats itself even within our own organization is really, really important. So it's a very beneficial relationship, and we're glad to see that it continues to grow.
Excellent. Thank you, Neil. Heather?
It makes me so happy to know that the MOU has been beneficial to your organization, Neil, and I hope that has been the experience of all of the affinity bars. Our ability to collaborate as bar associations has always existed, but there is something about this MOU that has made the relationship different. And I think of it sort of like a marriage. These are Heather Zerke's words, where you have unique individuals that come together and just make this commitment to each other. And I think that that's what we have done as bar associations. We continue to exist as unique individuals and organizations, but we are together. And Neil is right, you know, about the importance of speaking out as an individual bar association. I hope that there's more opportunity, and that the CMBA in particular will take advantage of its position to speak out on behalf of our other bar associations, our affinity bars, when we need to. I think that there's power when we speak together, but also when we speak out on behalf of each other.
Thank you, Heather. And you know, I'm going to ask you to just kind of continue on with this thought in mind. So what I think I may have said this at the very beginning. You know, I always appreciated the rich, diverse legal community that we have here in Greater Cleveland. And you actually said this, Heather. You said that, you know, we have these different bar associations, but there's no competition. So I'm hoping that you can add some additional color and perspective to why our affinity bar is important to the CMBA, and you know how will CMBA continue to promote the diverse richness of our legal community? I mean, the MOU is just one example, but there are other ways that the CMBA does that. And I was hoping you can talk about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think certainly we're going to continue to honor our piece of the MOU and all of the administrative assistance that we're providing to the affinity bars. Our staff, our professional staff, continues to be available to the affinity bars. You know, and I realize that is one of the huge benefits of being a part of a metro bar, is that you have access to our professional staff, and we really do just have amazing people that work at the CMBA. You know, we live to serve our members. We want to continue to do high quality programming together. Our Real Talk series is a great example of where our members are coming together with members of the affinity bars to have important conversations about race and racial inequality in our communities. And we hope that will continue, and that not just the legal community will become part of those communications, or those programs, but that we'll be able to share that message with the community. It's so important that the CMBA continue its progress as a thought leader in our community. We want to bring the affinity bars along with us on that journey, so that the community is looking at us whenever there are issues related to law and justice, and that we're all heard. And so I see that as our continuing relationship.
Excellent, thank you. So obviously the partnership with CMBA is critically important for many of our affinity bars locally. And you know, this wasn't intended to be a commercial for CMBA, but obviously there's a lot of benefit, administrative support, amplifying marketing, bringing a legal constituency together to talk about important issues, really bringing the legal community together. Those are all important things. So as we think about what makes these smaller organizations who are partnering with CMBA stronger, what are some of those key things that, from your perspective, Heather, you know, your role as general counsel of the bar, your role in dealing with, you know, disciplinary issues, what are some of the things that bar leaders, smaller bar organizations need to learn and understand in order to enhance the effectiveness of their organizations, protect themselves and protect their organizations? Do you have any perspectives about that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that it really goes back to this training piece, and making sure that the members of your board know the organization inside and out, that your rules are up to date, and that you're complying with what your own internal rules are. It may be important. I don't know how it would work with an affinity bar, but certainly the CMBA has insurance. We have insurance to protect our board members and our association. So that may be something to look at. Board members need to understand their responsibility as a fiduciary to the organization. And there are really good resources available through the state of Ohio, guidance to board members about their duties and responsibilities. So as much education as you can provide to your members as possible, I think that makes you a more secure organization.
Mhm. I think that's a really important point, Heather, about training and the reminder that there's a fiduciary obligation that bar leaders have to their organizations. I'm not sure if that's always top of mind. Neil, can you talk about that a little bit? Is that something that you guys have thought about? And I don't know what your thoughts are there, but to me that really jumped out at me.
Yeah, it's something we think about and probably don't give enough time. I mean, Heather, I love your point of just literally running through the bylaws, especially when you're bringing people on.
Mhm.
They're there for a reason, and that gives you your framework for how to run your organization. And I think it's really important. And I love the emphasis on training. And to me, I think the fiduciary duty, not from a legal sense, but it starts prior to taking on the position. And what I would
Mhm.
encourage affinity bar leaders and aspiring leaders to think about is think about how it works up balances with your career. Make sure you have the time going in to it. And this isn't to discourage anyone, honestly. Like, there's a way to be involved where you don't have to be a board member. But I think if you're going to be a board member and you take on that obligation, you're committing to something. And
Mhm.
we don't do this, but our national affiliate, which I'll talk about towards the end, but one of their recommended best practices is actually, it's almost like a formal contract that they have incoming board members sign committing to X, Y, and Z. We're a little more low key than that. We want to just we want to focus on actionable items. I think that's personally my preference, but I think that checklist is something good to consider. And I would encourage, especially for the affinity bars that are just starting, because there are some, I know, for example, the Filipino American Law Association, that's a newer bar that started in the last year or two. I would encourage these types of organizations to think about that checklist for bringing on new board members, because I think it helps really clearly delineate what is expected, so no one's caught off guard coming into it.
Yeah,
Neil, if I can just add to that really quick, Ron, because Neil, we at the CMBA do have kind of we do have a set of expectations that all board members are presented with. They have access to that before they even agree to come on the board, to your point about no surprises. And then we ask our board members midway through their first year, midway through each bar year, to sort of grade themselves, to do a self-assessment. What is their level of engagement with the CMBA? Are they sort of sticking with these expectations, living up to these expectations? And they get feedback from us about their service on the board. And we agonized over whether to, put this in place and then what was going to be in it. It's a very long process. But I think that it's, to your point, it is a good thing for the organization. It's sometimes you have to have tough conversations as a result of those assessments, but it's all about the mission of the bar and the role that everybody plays. And you want to make sure everybody's doing their part.
Yeah. So, and just to kind of, again, to underscore the point, I think that's spot on. You're setting those expectations up front. No one's, surprised about what the commitments are, but invariably, some of us were surprised, right, when we stepped into these roles. So, Neil, if you had to put together that checklist, what would be some of the things that you would put on the checklist? And Heather, whatever Neil doesn't say, what are some things from your perspective, those things that you agonized over? I remember going through that exercise not too long ago. What are some of those things that we should be thinking about?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's certainly something I would want to do in collaboration with our board. And the reason why is, I have my vantage, but we have a lot of really good leaders that have been there over the years.
I'm not asking you. I'm not asking you to speak for ABBA, but just I want Neil's perspective. You've been in this role. You've seen it. What are your thoughts? No commitment on ABBA.
Purely, I would communicate literally the logistics of, simply what's the meeting schedule, what are the meeting attendance requirements, and what is your expectation? I mean, from my perspective, if you're going to be a board member, there should be some, whether it's a committee or some event or some program that comes out of your time on the board, however that may be. It may not be a public facing communication, it may not, but I think getting folks to commit to something is a really good way to develop sort of a commitment to the organization. I do like to have a wide range of discretion because I'm a practicing lawyer. I get it. We don't have time, and I know things change over the years. And so I think just kind of giving from a high level, let's set some actionable goals for the year. I think that would be a good place for us.
Excellent. Thank you, Neil. Sorry to put you on the spot, but thanks for being.
Not at all. You told me you might do that in all fairness.
I did give you fair warning. Heather, anything to add there?
Yeah, Neil is right. One of the things that we included in our expectations was about meeting attendance. We need our board members in the boardroom when we're making decisions. And so we're going to look at board member attendance at our meetings. We're going to look at their involvement with sections and committees. Usually folks that have moved into the boardroom got there because of their significant involvement with our sections and committees and programs. So, but once they get into the boardroom, we don't want them to stop doing those things. So are they continuing to give of their time to our sections and committees and programs? We also have the Cleveland Metro Bar Foundation, that is the fundraising arm of the association and is so critical to our public programs, our community programs. And so our board members contributing to and supporting the work of the foundation, whether it's through financial contributions or their attendance at Rock the Foundation in February or the Halloween run in October. We need a financial commitment, but we also need their physical presence. And it's also important to us that we have their firm support, and board members need to know when they come on board that we're really hoping that they're going to get their firms, the lawyers at their firms, to also support the Bar Association. So we want really good ambassadors.
Excellent. All great suggestions. And Heather, you kind of mentioned something that I think is important in hindsight, but curious to know how some of the smaller bars or affinity bars kind of deal with this, and that is the self-assessment, right? So once you're in the role, you're doing the thing, you've got some successes, maybe work gets a little bit busy, you kind of lose a little steam, or maybe just get tired, right? And so can you talk a little bit more about the importance of self-assessments and how you've seen that really help strengthen the organization or repivot the organization? If you can talk about that, and then Neil, if you have any perspective about that as well, I'd like for you to jump in there. So Heather, if you can start us off, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah. So we have our members do the self-assessment at about the 6-month mark. So they're halfway into the bar year and we ask them to take a look. And you're right that sometimes lawyers they get busy in their practices and they sort of forget about the work that we're asking them to do on behalf of the Bar Association. And I think that is usually a really good wake-up call for folks, because I don't think that anybody wants to say, I shouldn't have committed to the CMBA. I want to give up my board seat. And that's what we want. We just want that little bit of a wake up call to sort of energize people. And I think that it's been effective. It's doing what we want it to do. It's not intended to be, punitive.
Not a performance evaluation.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. I mean, we want to continue to encourage people to stay involved with us. So it's effective just as that wake up call.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love the idea of the formal self-assessment. I'm thinking in practice, and you're right. I think that's the fear. You don't want the fact that people have stepped up to serve on the board. I don't take that lightly. Just getting that commitment is important, and that's meaningful to me. And I never want to dissuade participation in however board members feel it is best. But I think as a best practice, you're absolutely right. It is important, whether you do it formally or informally, to go back and literally look at what worked, what didn't, and why. And, And I think we do that. I think as lawyers, that's part of our nature to go back and try to understand, sort of the root cause. But it's interesting when I actually went in-house where management principles and some of those principles are taught in a different way. That gave me a better framework to kind of apply them to running a bar organization. So.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's interesting because the whole self-assessment thought, this kind of relates back to one of the questions that we received during the last segment, which was how do you, have the difficult conversation with someone who, was involved, but then, for some reason, they're just not fully engaged. And, the idea of the self-assessment, as I understand it, is it's exactly that. It's to recognize that things change. It's to reestablish expectations, maybe even repivot expectations so that everyone's on the same page. It kind of goes back to the communication. And I think as a strengthening agent for the organization, it's just something that, we should all do. And I agree with you, Neil, that we probably do it informally in various ways, but formalizing it might be something that all of us can benefit from. So I just appreciate you guys letting me go down that path there.
Sure. Ron, if I could just ask a question, actually to Heather, I don't mean to catch you off guard, but
Sure.
That is somewhere where actually, how do you have those discussions when you try to reprioritize someone? I mean, are there any tips that you found to be helpful in those discussions?
Well, I think that what really helps is and we want our bar leaders to be having these conversations with other board members. And if you are an engaged and inspiring leader, I think that you have tremendous ability to really encourage your board and to spur people on and get them to buy into the work that you're doing. And so just being called out by a colleague, how are you doing? And maybe that's probably a better way to approach it. Just how are you doing? Let's talk about what you have going on in your personal, not in your personal life, in your professional life. What are the things that are preventing you from being as engaged as we know you want to be in the bar association? And I think too that just helping members understand that this is a season. Judge Adrian talked about how lawyers think they don't have time for bar service, and maybe somebody comes on board and then they decide I don't have time. But when they realize the professional benefits that they're going to realize from their service, the connections that they're going to make within the bar and within the community, you can't afford not to do this. And so I think helping members realize this is just a season, this is maybe just a couple of years, this is not a commitment that you have made forever. And so just give us as much as you can for as long as we have you. And, then you can move back into your role as a committee member, or whatever, but just trying to get the best out of your people for those couple of years is key, and being that inspiring leader for them is so important.
That's great. Thanks.
Thank you. Yep. So I want to kind of pivot just a slightly and kind of talk about the whole organizational leadership concept. So, the one question from the last segment had to do with whether or not affinity bars should, get involved in voting rights. And you heard, Judge Adrian's perspective on it. And Neil, you kind of said earlier that the past few months has really caused the ABA board to really think about the organization and its role in sort of dealing with the unfortunate, rise in Asian hate and that sort of thing. Can you talk a little bit, and again, this is just Neil Begat talking, not on, the ABA talking, but can you just talk a little bit about, what transformation you've seen in your bar now that you can sort of confront it with some of these issues? I know some organizations say, we're only about the profession. Our job is about the professional development of, lawyers and the interests of lawyers. And when it comes to social issues or advocacy, there are other organizations that are, focused on those areas. But can you just share some of your thinking, your thoughts If there's been conversation that you can share, feel free. But I'm just curious because one of the things that I've noticed with affinity bars, especially minority bars, is that minority bars tend to be more focused on some of those issues than perhaps some of the non-minority bars. And I'm just curious if you have a perspective about that.
Yeah, I honestly, we're lawyers and we're leaders,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
there are times that we have to step up. And I think, you know, there was an incident. I don't want to talk about the incident, but there was a situation that had happened that affected the lawyers in our community,
Mhm.
and that forced us to act because we knew if we didn't, nobody else would raise the issue. We were lucky to get a lot of support as we were raising the issue, but this is this comes with the role, and this is a moment to act. And we are lucky to have a very, very passionate board who has experience in advocacy here. I think one other piece that I want to stress here is that because we are affiliated with a national organization, um, that is very helpful for us from an advocacy perspective as well, because they have the in-house resources and the reach to really help amplify messages. Um,
Mhm.
I keep coming back to our volunteer organization, and I say that because we have to pick and choose between the things that we can and can't do. But what's really nice about having the backstop of a national affiliate is they can make advocacy on a large scale that we can then sign off. And so, for example, our national affiliate, we get the chance to sign on to Supreme Court briefing. We get really, really amazing opportunities to use our voice, but in a way that is effective for a small organization. But from our perspective, and I think I can say this on behalf of ABBA, this is a really important time. There are things going on that are concerning, and it is really important that we take action on it, because I don't think any of us want to sort of look back and say, "Wow, we could have done more." I mean, this is part of ABBA. I wish we didn't have to, but this is part of it right now.
Understood. Heather, you have something to add there? And I didn't want to suggest that CMBA or any other part doesn't deal with those issues, but I just want to know if you had a perspective.
No, just like I said earlier, I hope that the CMBA will. This is Heather Zerke speaking, not on behalf of the CMBA,
Sure,
but
sure.
I hope we take advantage of our position to speak out on behalf of our sister and brother bar associations when we can.
Excellent. Thank you. So just a reminder to the participants, because we're closing in the last 15 minutes here before we move to our final segment. If you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. If there are no questions, I will continue. But before I do that, I do want to ask Neil and Heather the same question I asked the last panelist. If there was a question that you were hoping I would ask that I didn't, feel free. Is there a question out there that you thought I was going to ask that I didn't, or that I should have?
I thought, and I think we've touched on this, but I think some of the overall best practices for the organization, there were a couple quick hits, I think, as our group was talking about it, I'd like to share if that's okay.
Sure,
and I'll
please,
just
please.
offer them out. So successorship, so important that we spend an hour on it. I cannot stress that. And I think looking back, I did not understand the importance of that. And I think, Ron, you might have said this in our meeting yesterday, and I think it really holds true. From day one, when you step into your role, you need to be thinking about who's going to be there next. And fundamentally, in a way, that is our utmost duty to the organization, is to make sure that it continues and make sure that you're bringing on new leaders. And I think this was well addressed in the other one, but it's not just bringing on leaders, it's actually training them on what to expect, right? What is happening next? And literally, like, what do you do, like on a monthly basis, or like, what are the expectations, so that they know how it's done, and just kind of how you work through those things. And you're not trying to tell people how to run the organization. I think that's the beauty of leadership. You get to change the organization the way you want to, but it is not fair to bring in people and not give them the tools that they need to do well in the organization, because it is a lot of responsibility, and it is important, and you're representing it to the community, and you want to do a good job. So arm your people. And we're lucky at ABBA that we've had a really good chain of leaders and of presidents who have helped. Again, there are periods of dormancy like every affinity bar. We're doing our best to avoid those, but I really think the emphasis on training does a lot there. And the other thing I wanted to mention is getting help. Honestly, like, it is okay to ask for help. And look, number one, to your board. Your board, it's so effective, and these are all effective lawyers, and they all have different skills. Extend the opportunities to your board to help take on things. And then locally, CMBA. CMBA is a good external partner to help us move the ball. And then on other things, our national organization provides a lot of support, a lot of infrastructure support, provides access to resources that our folks can use. So the other thing I was going to say is, some of the little things, making sure to thank people for the things that they're doing. I know that's obvious, but it's a volunteer activity, and it's supposed to be fun. Like, this is supposed to be, I mean, it's good for your career. Trust me, I've gotten so many benefits out of it, but you want people to look forward to coming there and making it a good environment. And, I think those are some of the things that I've learned. And then finally, we talked about learning from the past, but really, like, try to understand why something didn't work. I mean, I can think of events that I put on where, we had low attendance, and really understanding what happened there. Was it a communications issue? Was it not interesting? It's really important to go through that analysis. But at the end of the day, I think there's a lot of good things that happen there, and you don't want to lose sight of those. I think you should sell those accomplishments, because at the end of the day, that is a retention play in of itself, to show the tangible benefits, so people understand why they should get involved in these organizations.
Excellent insights, Neil. Thanks so much.
And let me jump on one thing that Neil said, because Neil is absolutely right, that thanking people is so important. And one of my favorite things that the CMBA started doing in the last 4 or 5 years is we have this beautiful stationery. We have these beautiful note cards. And I send these note cards all the time. And maybe it's already an old-fashioned thing, sending real notes to people, but I send them all the time to our volunteers and to people that just go above and beyond. And I encourage bar leaders to look for the people that are going above and beyond. And it means so much to volunteers when they get that note in the mail. I get these emails from people that they love the card, they put it in their office. It's a great thing. And so if you don't have stationery, you need stationery.
Thank you, Heather.
Well, and so Ron, in response to your question, about anything else, I think in my role, as I still wear my bar council hat, and I think that there is a case to be made for bar involvement and leadership as a way to avoid grievances and disciplinary issues. We just looked at this issue very recently. I don't have hard numbers for anybody, but we took a look at cases over the last 3 years, lawyers that have been disciplined in Cuyahoga County. And with only one exception, only one of them was a CMBA member. And I'm not saying that you have to be a CMBA member, that is the way to avoid grievances. But I think that there are a couple of things that we see, some commonalities among lawyers that have discipline problems. One is that they are not current on CLE. Many lawyers that become the subject of a formal complaint also are not current in their hours. They have maybe faced a monetary sanction. They also, in many cases, do not carry professional liability insurance. And just those two things, just doing what you already have to do, complying with Supreme Court rules, having your insurance, making sure that your insurance is current, that you're keeping up with CLE. And the CLE piece is something that the Bar Association can help with. We have programs happening all the time. And if you're a regular member, you're receiving emails, and I know that the affinity bars do too, that you're offering programs. There are oftentimes programs that you can attend for free and get some of your hours in each biennium for free. the CMBA has an ethics hotline that members can take advantage of. And so when you find yourself in a difficult spot ethically, or you're facing a tough decision, you don't know what to do, you can call us before you do something. We can help you get the resources that you need so that you can exercise your professional judgment in that situation. And if you come to us with something that's a really tough question for us, I am so grateful for our network of 5,000 lawyers in all different practice areas. And I can put members in touch with each other who can help each other talk through some of these tough issues. So before you make a huge mistake, use resources like the ethics hotline. And if you haven't seen recently, at the end of the Bar Journal, the very last page now is a new column called Ethics Encore, which is an idea that came out of our Ethics and Professionalism Committee. It's written like a Dear Abby column. And our Ethics and Professionalism Committee is committed to giving practical ethics advice and information to members. So follow that column. Don't miss that every week. Turn to the back page of the Bar Journal and look at the good advice that's being offered every month. So I just encourage members, be involved, whether it's the CMBA or another affinity bar. Surround yourself with professional, ethical lawyers. Think about who is in your circle. We try to teach this to our middle schoolers and high schoolers. Who are your friends? Surround yourself with good lawyers and call on those people. I think all those things help you stay out of trouble.
I think that's a great reminder, Heather, that when you're actively, whether you're in bar leadership or not, when you're actively engaged in bar associations, you kind of learn where these resources are, and you can keep yourself out of trouble. And sometimes it's difficult if you have a busy practice and other commitments, you kind of forget those things, but that's a great reminder. But the other thing that strikes me is if you are in bar leadership, then there's the concept of leading by example. And so, probably from an organizational perspective, one of the worst things that can happen to a bar is if the bar leader gets in really serious trouble, because then it just, it has an impact, a potential impact on the entire organization. So very important reminder, Heather, so thank you so much. I don't see any questions, so I'm gonna, throw it out there for another, 20 seconds to see if there's a question out there. And I'll talk a little slowly, but if not, then we will probably end this session to give a few minutes for the next panel to set up.
Well, we are really in for a treat with C.K. Hoffler being our guest today. As many of you may know, Josiah C.K. Hoffler is the 78th president of the National Bar Association, which is the largest and oldest association of African American attorneys, judges, and law professors in the United States. CK was educated in Switzerland and Canada, and she received her undergraduate degree from Smith College, and she's fluent in French. She also speaks Spanish and Portuguese. CK received her law degree from Georgetown University Law School. And for the past 30 years, CK has been one of the top plaintiffs' attorneys in our nation, winning $800 million in settlements and judgments for her clients, including obtaining a $139 million verdict against Anheuser-Busch and some of the largest verdicts in several jurisdictions around the country. CK has her law license in 5 states, and she previously worked as a partner at famed attorney Willie Gary's law firm in Stuart, Florida, where she managed its commercial and international litigation. Now CK has her own law firm in Atlanta. However, in my opinion, CK's most important qualification is her humanity and her kindness. I witnessed it firsthand because although it's hard to believe looking at us, CK was an upperclassman when I was at Georgetown, and she couldn't have been kinder to myself and all the other underclassmen. So when CK talks about teach one, reach one, and lifting up our community, I can tell you that's really a part of who she is. So it's my pleasure to introduce CK Hoffler, the National President of the National Bar Association. Welcome, CK.
Well, thank you so much, Marlon. What can I say about you? I remembered you from law school, and whenever I've seen you, it's just been wonderful because you were stellar in law school. And what I loved about Marlon Primes, and I'm speaking to people who know you, but even as early as law school, is not only was he thoughtful, not only was he brilliant, but he had a strong sense of community and belonging, and that confidence, even in the craziness of law school, because law school, of course, can be a crazy time for all of us. Marlon, I just remember that you exuded that confidence and knowing that you were going to be successful. So it was no shock to me that you became a leader in the NBA and the National Bar Association, that you became a leader in our affiliate chapter, that became a leader in your community. And it's just a delight for me to have this conversation with you and your members and all the other leaders on the panel today. So thank you for that great introduction. You know, Cleveland used to be like my second home. I'm originally from Buffalo. And you know, back when I was younger, when we wanted to go someplace and have a great time, we'd go to Cleveland. That's what we do.
Well, it's definitely still the place to be and place to go as well. So we really appreciate you being a part of the panel discussion. We appreciate all the great work that you've done throughout your career, and especially your great work as the president of the National Bar Association. Many in our audience may not be familiar with the National Bar Association. Can you talk a little bit about the National Bar Association and its historical significance in our country?
Absolutely. Well, in 1925, you have to think back to the turn of that century. African-American lawyers, Black lawyers, were not allowed to become members of the American Bar Association, or frankly, any integrated bar. And so thus the creation of the National Bar Association. Gertrude Rush was the only woman who was part of the original group of people that created the National Bar Association, because there was recognition that even for us to be effective in servicing our community, we needed to have ongoing training, which now we call CLEs. We needed to be able to fellowship with each other, to talk about common problems, because remember, this was during segregation. You know, the National Bar has lived and thrived throughout the Jim Crow era. And so the National Bar Association was always that anchor for Black lawyers throughout the country. Over the years, it's grown to have 80 affiliate chapters. We have sections, we have divisions, we have really an international component as well to our membership. So we're everywhere, and we represent the interests of over 66,000 African-American lawyers, judges, law students, and law professors. So it's massive in its reach. It's global in how we've expanded, and it really is a home, no matter what kind of law you practice, whether you're a corporate lawyer, a tax lawyer, a government lawyer, or a civil rights lawyer, employment, opioid lawyer, whatever you do, it becomes a home. And many people belong to our affiliate chapters. And so it really gives me pleasure to be speaking, with one of our affiliates, because we so appreciate the excellent work that our affiliates do in our community. And that's the key. Whether lawyers, whether African-American, Black lawyers like it or not, we are opinion leaders. We are community leaders. And the National Bar Association just brings us all together under one umbrella so that we can be the purveyors of justice, be social justice engineers, and make sure that our communities, no matter what our practice consists of, that our communities are taken care of, especially when we are operating in an era of pandemics on top of pandemics. Right now, as we speak, we are seeing one of the worst displays, even though we've been that way before, we know as Black people, the worst displays of police brutality on top of police brutality, which is a pandemic in and of itself. And we're operating within a global pandemic, which is COVID-19, not to mention within the midst all around us. I'm here in Georgia within another pandemic, which is voter suppression. So if ever there were a time for African-American and Black lawyers to be relevant and needed and leaders in our community, it's today. So that's why the NBA is more relevant now than ever and more needed now than ever.
And CK, you've done a great job not only advocating those issues, but you've done a great job running a successful law firm. And knowing you since law school, I know this didn't happen by accident. This involved careful planning. So can you speak to the question of, we have someone that perhaps wants to be a leader of a bar association. What consideration should you take into consideration before deciding to run?
Absolutely. Well, Marlon, preparation is everything. Whether if you're a trial lawyer, you've got to prepare for trial. I always say whenever I do CLEs or speak to trial lawyers that if you are a trial lawyer, you must be the most knowledgeable and prepared person in that courtroom. No one else should know your case better than you. And the same holds true if you are seeking to be a president of a bar association, of a national bar association. You must be prepared for it. You can't just go into that awesome responsibility, an awesome honor. It is an honor. You can't go into that without being prepared. You've got to prepare your life. So if you're in private practice, you have to prepare yourself that for a year, or in some instances, you serve a 2-year term, that you're not going to be able to navigate on the same level with your practice. Whether you're in private practice or if you work for the government, you're just not going to be able to do it because of the demands of a national organization, or sometimes even an affiliate organization or a local bar. It's very time consuming. So the first thing is preparation of your life and your family. Speak to your family. Talk to them before you run. Don't wait till you run and win and then talk to your family and then realize there's a major problem. In my instance, I have teenage sons. One is in 12th grade this year and the other one's in 10th grade. My 12th grader is going on to college. And so for me, it became a family discussion before I decided to run. So that's all what I call part of preparation. You have to prepare your family, you have to prepare your practice, and you have to prepare your finances. And sometimes family, practice, and finances all go together. But you have to have a plan. Otherwise, you will go into doing this incredible service with your hands tied behind your back and feeling some kind of way because you're not able to meet the requirements that you need to live. So if you feel that that's going to be a struggle, it may not be the time for you to do it because you're going to have to give of your heart and soul. When you lead a national voluntary organization, you have to answer the call. You can't decide, oh, I'm too busy. You must answer the call every time. To do that, you must have the time. You must set aside the time. To do that, you must set aside the family time because indeed it's going to be a sacrifice. And finally, you've got to look at it as a labor of love. It's got to be a labor of love because you're going to put in so much time and you're going to give so much, and you have to consider yourself a social justice engineer or a social engineer. Just as Charles Hamilton Houston said, look, if you're a lawyer, either you're going to be a Black lawyer, you're going to be either a social engineer or you're going to be a pariah. Well, you don't want to be a pariah. And if you're leading an organization, you've got to be that social, and I'm going to add justice engineer, because that's what we call ourselves today. and lead the way, walk the walk and talk the talk, because we are membership organizations. And our goal, especially when you're in a pandemic, is to elevate the brand and to serve your members.
Now, CK, you made a lot of very good points about just preparation, and that's certainly consistent with my knowledge of you for all these years. And you talked about just preparing your family, preparing your practice, and preparing your finances. Can you speak to what considerations should be made about assessing the organization that you plan on leading?
Well, absolutely. You definitely want to leave an organization in a better position than you found it. And don't look at what anyone in the past did or didn't do, because it's a labor of love for everyone. But you look at where you are, the circumstances and the environment within which you're serving, and you have to elevate the organization, take it to the next level. That really should be the goal. Do innovative, creative things so you can elevate the brand. For instance, this year we focused on 3 pandemics: COVID-19, police brutality, and voter suppression. But because we were in an election year, that voter suppression became very important very quickly, right away. In fact, I, as president-elect, was chair of our election protection effort. In that, because I knew that once I got into office very quickly, I had to mobilize and get right into our voter suppression or election protection activities. We spent a lot of time and we mobilized our forces. And the Young Lawyers Division, for instance, they played a critical role, as did our partners. We partnered with the Divine Nine. We had a historic partnership with the Lawyers Committee, with the NAACP, with a lot of voluntary election protection groups, as at Transformative Justice Coalition and other grassroots organizations, because one thing we knew was that there were forces that would stop at nothing to suppress the right of Black and brown folks to vote. And we had to be those standing out front as lawyers. And it was during COVID. For instance, Marlon Primes chaired our COVID task force. Incredible job that he's done, continues to do. Why was that important? Because when we're talking about voting and voter suppression and the presidential elections, and here in Georgia, the Georgia runoff elections at the National Bar was very, very engaged in the Senate runoff elections. That went hand in hand with our COVID efforts, because we were venturing into spaces where people didn't have protective gear. Another initiative is trying to bridge or to close that digital divide. Marlon was very and is very engaged in that, getting computers, technology to these kids who are learning for the first time virtually. Well, you really can't learn virtually if you don't have a computer, if you don't have access to high-speed internet, not regular low speed, but high-speed internet. And in disadvantaged communities, that is the reality. So our efforts were geared towards the 7 or 8 cities that we felt, and really Marlon helped us to identify as the worst hit by COVID. We know that this disease has ravaged our community and disproportionately impacted us. So our leadership on COVID, be it testing, when testing was an issue, but they didn't have testing sites in our communities, or even the vaccination. All of those things were tied up into our COVID initiatives. Even now, allowing, we're in the process of negotiating a deal whereby law students, African-American law students, will have access to hotels because they're studying for the bar. Some of them don't have the circumstances that we have, that we take for granted in a non-COVID environment, to study for the bar. So allowing them to gain free access to hotels, to the business centers, so they would have high-speed internet, so they can just study for the bar exam, which is critical, because without a license, you really can't practice. Not really, you absolutely can't practice law. So those types of initiatives during COVID, being a part of the political process in a nonpartisan way. The right to vote is nonpartisan. And the National Bar leaders got involved in litigation in Georgia to try to restore to the rolls close to 200,000 Georgians who were illegally purged from the rolls. So from the National Bar standpoint, we were everywhere, because that's where lawyers need to be. And that was part of my mission, to elevate the brand, putting in place leaders like Marlon and others who we knew would deliver. I knew Marlon would deliver because he was that kind of person in law school. So when I put together my team, which is important, you put together your leadership team, you put together a team that is going to deliver. That team is a reflection of you, is a reflection of the brand, is a reflection of the NBA or the bar that you lead. So it's critical to make sure you have all of those pieces in place. Otherwise, it's difficult for you to lead. It really is. You can do it, but it's difficult. And you don't want to have your hands tied behind your back, especially during a pandemic. We never predicted that COVID would even exist. When I was president-elect, there was no such thing as COVID. We didn't know about COVID. And then when I became president in July, the March before, that's when everything shut down and you have to pivot. So learning how to pivot has to be the greatest skill that you have. But as a mother, I've been pivoting forever. You know, pivoting, another word for pivoting is juggling. But when you have pandemics that fall in your lap, you must pivot to ensure that your organization is still prominently positioned to make a difference in your community.
Well, CK, you mentioned a number of great projects that you are working on as the president of the National Bar Association, the COVID pandemic, voter suppression, and also the police misconduct issues. Just as a tip for future bar leaders, how did you go through the process of determining which particular projects you're going to focus on during your presidency? Because as we know in the African American community and many communities of color, there are a whole range of issues that could garner your attention. So can you speak to your selection process in terms of how you decided what are the three things that you should focus on during your presidency?
Absolutely, Marlon. You know, I looked at this country. I looked at our community and I tried to identify the three worst things that were plaguing us where lawyers could make a difference. Certainly we can make a difference on everything, but where we can make the greatest impact and where our communities needed us. Well, COVID and the disinformation campaign that we saw with COVID when it first hit the scene was one area that I knew that our lawyers could help. And we teamed up, for instance, with the National Medical Association Rainbow Push Coalition. And we did this COVID manifesto that went to our communities that was designed to inform and dispel the disinformation in our communities, teaming up with the National Medical Association that, like us, represents 35,000 African-American and Black doctors throughout the country was critical because we needed to hear from them. We weren't trusting what we were seeing on TV because people were speaking out of both sides of their mouth. Is it deadly? Is it not? Is it just a passing thing? Is it like a flu? We didn't know what was what. But one thing we did know is that people in our community were dying disproportionately at alarming rates. So we had to do something. So that's why COVID, that was an easy one. Voter suppression, we were coming up on an election year. So we knew that the role of election protection, protecting the right to vote was going to be critical. Because if we can't vote, we can't do anything. If we can't elect officials, and if there are problems with us being able to vote, as a people, Black and brown people, young folks, we knew that that was going to pose a problem, and it was nonpartisan. I may have had particular views about a president or two, but the efforts that we led on behalf of the National Bar were nonpartisan because our position is the right to vote is what everybody should have. And it should not be whether you're a Democrat or Republican, we should have the right to vote. I mean, how are we even challenging that? We should support anything that gives people the right to vote. And so that's why we focused on that. Police brutality was killing our communities at alarming rates. People in our communities, I am president during the era of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and on and on and on. But we know police brutality has infected our communities forever. In fact, I don't recall a time when police brutality wasn't an issue in our communities, but it just took on a different toll. And now mainstream America is focusing on it, number one, but more importantly, all of the major and smaller, but certainly high profile police brutality cases in this country were being led by National Bar Association lawyers and leadership, whether it was Ben Crump, who's a past president, Darrell Parks, a past president, Chris Stewart, a past president of affiliate chapter, Lonita Baker, who is Breonna Taylor's lawyer, she's a vice president of the NBA, Lee Merritt, a very active member of the NBA, and on and on and on in our communities throughout the country. These are National Bar members. What do? I must support them. We must communicate and collaborate and be a partner with the Congressional Black Caucus. The Congressional Black Caucus led the way for the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. They drafted it. They were the main people who were engaged in that. We are partners with them. We wanted to make ourselves available. You need experts, we got them. Anything you need lawyers to review anything, we want to be that arm. And so it was critically important on police brutality for us to play a role. And you see every day we're going from, I don't even know what's happening in Minnesota other than tragedy on top of tragedy, as we are seeing unfold the prosecution and now the defenses in their case, of course, of the Derek Chauvin trial. It's not the George Floyd, it's the Derek Chauvin murder trial. Another Black child is murdered right there. This is craziness. So the National Bar, Ben Crump and others were there, front center, and we coordinate our efforts. We absolutely do. So Marlon, when I thought of the 3 areas, I really wish there hadn't been a Breonna Taylor. I really wish there hadn't been a Dante Wright, Ahmaud Arbery, and the thousands of other unnamed victims of police brutality who never even get the headlines, whose family just say, we just want this over. We don't even want to fight this. It's too devastating. We have to do it for them. So that the circumstances around the country informed the areas that I picked to focus on, because I felt that National Bar lawyers could make a tremendous impact to this community, and we have on those 3 buckets. And of course, other things fall under them because COVID is continuing on and on. Before it was the testing, then was the disinformation, and then now it's a vaccination. And we are purveyors of justice and correct information. I know in my family, for instance, it doesn't matter what the legal issue is, whether I've ever practiced that way or not. And in my extended family, they're calling me and they're saying, well, what should we do? And again, doesn't matter if I even know a single thing about that practice area. My family, immediate, extended family is going to look to me as a lawyer to give them answers. And that's the same for all of us. It's not unique to me. All of us are in that position, whether we like it or not. So then we can choose. Are you going to be a social engineer, like Charles Hamilton Houston said, or are you going to be a pariah? Because if you don't pick up the mantle and do something, then you are definitely a pariah. So that's how I was able to manage that whole thing. And we've had such just extraordinary volunteers in our affiliate chapters and just nationally everywhere that have stepped up to the plate and answered the call.
You talked about a lot of great projects that you've been involved with, and a lot of our leaders and affiliate chapters and our bars of color are volunteer. So it's easy for them to look at all these projects and just say, hey, this is overwhelming. Can you speak to the importance of getting a good team in place so you can accomplish some of the things that you've talked about today?
Certainly.
And how do you go about doing that?
I go back, teamwork is critical. I went back to my roots at Georgetown because that's where I learned how to be a lawyer. And that's where I developed, law school for me was a means to an end. I can't say that I found it to be particularly exhilarating because I didn't. It was a means to an end, but the relationships and the people that I met in law school, for me, I carry so close to my heart. And so what I did is I went straight to what I knew. And there are probably 10 people in our leadership right now in the National Bar who went to Georgetown with me, like Marlon. I mean, our treasurer went to Georgetown, our general counsel went to Georgetown, the person who's head of and that's David Green, Nick Austin, Marlon Primes, heading the task force. We've got the person who I have tasked to be our corporate liaison, to chair the executive director search. Tracy Poole went to law school with me, and it just goes on and on and on and on. We've got Randa Trapp, who went to law school with us as well. She's a recently retired, as in 1 month ago, Superior Court judge. She's now joined the ranks of JAMS. She's going to be a neutral, but she chaired the Judicial Council section. She's chaired and done so much. I could go Woody Johnson, chairs our pro bono efforts. So if I just went down the list, there are probably more than 10 that are in leadership that went to Georgetown Law. Tamara Lawson, chairing the professors of the law professor division of the MBA. And so when it came to us addressing the travesty that is happening at Georgetown Law, where white professors had the audacity to say, form their lips to say that Black students, the Blacks, not even Black students, the Blacks, like we're in South Africa, the Blacks are some of the worst performers at Georgetown Law. We had to take a position because that had an impact on those students, those children, because they are children who are in law school. And by the way, they're our members, because based on what we've done this year in our administration, every single member of BALSA is automatically a member of the MBA unless they opt out. So our members were being attacked from our alma mater, lessening and decreasing the value of our degree and putting into question our legal education. That was not acceptable because it's Georgetown today. It's, you know, it's any other law school tomorrow because all African-American law students experience some level of something. So the leadership team for me came from primarily people that I knew in law school, but then secondarily people who I'd worked with. You know, Akua Kapak, she's an extraordinary lawyer in DC. She was my chief of staff when I ran my campaign. I worked with her. She was one of my co-chairs when we put on the convention in Atlanta. So again, I went with who I knew because I knew if my back was up against the wall, she would deliver and I didn't have to worry about her follow through. Other people that are part of the administration, my administration, some of them were elected, but some of them were not elected. Volunteers that I got just were people that I knew I could rely on, whose word was gold, who had my back and I have their back. Ethel Isaacs Williams, she's the National Vice President of the Link. She just happens to be National Vice President of the Link, but I've known Ethel since before law school. An extraordinary transactional lawyer. So I tapped into her as well. Sean Abney, when I was a partner at the Gary firm many years ago. So I spent time in practice in Florida. So I called on Sean Abney. She was our general counsel because what do I know? When I practiced there, I knew if I wanted to get something done, Sean Abney can do it. So I went to people who I knew I could rely on. And then I have a whole group of what I call, in the mafia parlance, consiglieres. I think that's what they call them. That would be none other one than Dave Wilmot. He was our dean when we were in law school. Everett Bellamy, he was our dean. All those past presidents of the NBA, I can call any one of them. They're so gracious with their time when I have dilemmas or thoughts, and they will give to me. So I have sort of an advisory council, senior advisors I can call on. And then I have a whole bevy of people who, whether I call on them or not, instinctively just sort of know, maybe I can help CK with this, that send me an email, say, hey, just want to bring this to your attention. Hey, what about this? What about that? 15 years ago, we did it this way. It worked well. What do you think about that? And then finally, we have our internal office, our staff, very small staff and technology people who I call on to do different things. And the way that I look at it, we're all one team. We all rise or we all fall. So if somebody's having difficulty with something, as opposed to criticizing them, I just want another person to help them so we can all get it done, because we've got to deliver for this magnificent organization. And that includes our affiliates. If an affiliate chapter wants us to do something, we have to do it because we're a membership organization. And I like to believe that we do it with class and style. We don't just do it, we do it on a high level because that's the branding and the image that we must project of the NBA. We're a phenomenal organization. I'm a member of so many other organizations, but there's just nothing to me like the NBA.
Well, CK, you made a lot of, very good points. You talked about the importance of planning and being prepared to make sure that you have a productive and peaceful year. And then you also talked about the importance of having a good team and how you assemble that team. Can you speak to the question of anytime you're dealing with lawyers, there's a possibility of conflict, especially since lawyers may have the same goal, but they may have a different viewpoint in terms of how to get there. What sort of advice would you give to our bar leaders in terms of how to manage that conflict to make sure that you have a productive and peaceful year?
I would suggest that you build coalition teams. You have to build coalition teams. Let's say there are a group of people that didn't support you when you were running. When you become the president, you won. Let go of all that because that's not even relevant. Embrace those people who were not part of your team, bring them into the fold and task them with something to do. The reason why that's important is because they all have something to offer. And you could have in that group dynamic leaders. And if you do, you want dynamic leaders on your team. Take away all of the negativity. And the way of doing that is by building coalition teams. You pick your people who are closest to you. Now that would be your posse. That's what I call it, posse. They're people closest to you, but then reach out beyond your posse and build coalition teams. And they can be people who love you, don't love you, but they love the organization. And you will know just because of being in the organization or having friends who have worked with them, if they're people that you can rely on or not. And so you've got to really use your great judgment with that. Reach out to students. Not that I don't have the energy, but my goodness, young lawyers and the students in law school, they have infinite energy, much like we did, Marlon, when we were in law school. Now, we have to be able to transition to them. I have a whole lot of energy, but it needs to be spent on running, doing the things, raising money and all that. But there are great foot soldiers, but you have to cultivate them. So you have to realize and recognize what each one of those key groups, demographics, need and want. And when I ran for president-elect, I reached out to all of them. And I said, tell me why you are not more active in the bar. And believe it or not, the young lawyer said this. One, I mean, it's kind of expensive for us to go because I ran in New York and New York was very expensive. In fact, I think I had the only event at the hotel, the only event. Everybody else had the event offsite. And so what the young lawyer said, it's very expensive. We can't afford to just travel to New York and do this and do that. And then some of them who were really candid with me said, quite frankly, CK, I don't see where the NBA adds value because, you know, this young generation, everything is about the value, you know, and we have to respect that. Adds value. I mean, I like to, you know, fellowship and go to parties and stuff, but, and I do like to attend the CLEs, but how does it add value? So I said to myself, there's one thing that I'm going to make sure that I do is have these young lawyers engaged so that they can see and experience how we add value. And I said, but we've got to build the pipeline. It's got to start in law school. And that's why we implemented this system where if you're a member of BALSA, you're automatically a member of the MBA, because that enables us to mentor everyone, all of them throughout the country. Number one, build them up, because law school is a process that tears you down. We all know this. We may have forgotten about it. I mean, you know, I can write a song about it, but the reality is law school is a process that tears you down. And then you deal with the racial animus and this and that and all of that. It can really break your spirit. So we have to step in and build these students up because they are our future. The young lawyers are our future because we've got to pass on the baton. So Marlon, I think the whole process of finding out what the different demographics, your demographics meaning your sections, your divisions, what's on their minds and bringing them into the fold. But to do that, you've got to just get rid of, you cannot be small-minded. You can't hold on to any grudges. I mean, I don't anyway, but I'm just saying as a leader, you really can't. And you got to be about the business of what's best for the bar. It's not about you. It's not about CK this year. It's about the NBA. I'm just the vessel. I'm the vehicle, but it's about the NBA. And as soon as you recognize that it's not about you as an individual, then you'll go about your business to find out what those demographic groups need and want. And then you have them buy into your vision. And then they can help you with your vision. Because I can tell you there's not been a single time when those young lawyers, the law students, and the women's law division, corporate, commercial, where I have asked them to do something and that they haven't jumped up to do it because I took the time to cultivate. And I wanted to know what I can do as president for them. Because after all, this is a service organization for our members. So I think that's how you build teams and get people to volunteer and to do the work. And also, don't be raggedy. You know, I mean, if you're raggedy, then you're going to get a raggedy result. But if you put forth a plan that's well thought out, and that goes again to the preparation, your organization of your life, your family, your plan to lead the year, then people will want to join it and jump on board.
Yeah, those are phenomenal tips, and especially important to bring young people on board and get them engaged. And I think you've done a great job in terms of your team being filled, not only with those that went to law school with us, but also young lawyers. But when you do that, can you kind of give any tips about how do you manage stress while you're a bar leader, and how do you avoid burnout?
That's an excellent question. I'm a trial lawyer, so burnout is always running in my direction. Like I'm always chasing burnout away. I'm pushing burnout away. How I cope is I try to strike that balance. I'm always juggling. You know, that's what we do as lawyers, we juggle. And I'm always trying to strike that balance between my family life, my spiritual life, you know, because I believe in God and, you know, can't go to church now, but we can receive our worship, and my professional life. And my professional life incorporates my bar service. So striking that balance and working out when you can, and most importantly, if you need help because of stress, reaching out and getting the help. In our community, you know, you can't even say the word mental. People think, oh no, I'm not crazy. It's not about being crazy. I mean, that's just, you know, we have to be honest with ourselves. That's the taboo in our community. And by the way, it's taboo in the legal community. It's taboo in the medical community as well. But it's not taboo for me, because if you are experiencing stress and it gets to a level where it is immobilizing you, it's paralyzing you, or causing you not to really reason in a way that benefits the organization, you must do something. You must do something. You can't, because you almost have a fiduciary duty to lead in a way that's appropriate. Now, people around you will see it, and they'll probably like say, you know, you think maybe you take a day off or something, or a week or something. But even, you don't even have to take time off. You just need to be in touch with your wellness and how to make sure that you are taking care of yourself first. You can't lead if you are not in a position of leading your own life. And part of leading your own life is being healthy. And whatever it takes to be healthy, and don't be afraid of having to reach out to a counselor. Most bar associations, like the Georgia Bar Association, you get 6 free sessions. And most bar associations I'm aware of, especially now in COVID, will do free counseling. And you don't have to, it's not something that's on your, you know, bar card or in the system. No, it's not. And it's because I know a lot of people feel like, well, I don't want anyone to know. Okay, well, you really shouldn't be embarrassed about that, because life happens, tragedies happen. We're in COVID. I mean, you want to talk about PTSD? I think all of us are experiencing some level of PTSD, because if I see another child shot, I mean, it's devastating. That, I mean, I do a lot of radio shows and some media stuff. And when I'm talking, literally, I had an experience where I was talking about one police brutality case, and breaking news with another person was shot. It was recently with the Wright case. We were talking about George Floyd because the trial is underway, and here we go again in the same locality, like I said before. So that's a wellness issue. So if you need help to cope with that, that would be normal. Your children might be coping with virtual learning, even if they're in college. I mean, they might come back home. Now, that could be something if you're used to being an empty nester, and then your grown children come back home, and all of a sudden it's kind of tight because y'all had planned your life without your children. But in COVID, weird things are happening. There are more COVID, they call them COVID divorces and COVID separations, because of the anxiety and stress associated with living in a pandemic. So people have to reach out to their lifelines. Your lifeline can be your church, your pastor. It can be a counselor. It can be through the bar association, counseling through the bar association, but it's got to be something or someone. Don't feel like you're on an island and do it on your own. So that's, Marlon, how I've been able to cope. That's what I look at. That's what I embrace, and that's what I preach. But you have to practice what you preach. And I do practice what I preach. And I have lifelines and I use them. I'm not afraid to use lifelines because I want to live. I choose to live, and I choose to have a strong quality of life. And so for me, I have to just do what it takes for me and for my family, most importantly. Because a lot of times when you're juggling as a lawyer, women particularly have this issue. I'm speaking now to the Black women who you know how we're always juggling. And Marlon, that's not to set aside what Black men go through, not at all. On the contrary. The difference is Black women, oftentimes, we don't stop and pause and take care of ourselves because we're taking care of everybody else in the family. So we have to learn that. That is, to me, learned behavior. At least for me, it was learned behavior, because you're really not good and healthy to anyone if you don't take care of your own body, of your own self, and being true to yourself. So those are the tips that I would have of how to cope with stress, distress, mental anguish. And how about this? All your cases taken off the docket when you're a trial lawyer and you eat what you kill. Well, that can cause some stress right there, right?
Right, which is a segue to my next question. I know you provide a lot of great tips in terms of, managing your stress and ways to go about that, looking at counseling. But can you speak to the issue of just maintaining your practice? Because the demographic of many of our bars of color are solo practitioners, because a lot of times we're not getting those opportunities to work at the larger firms or the corporations. So in the National Bar Association, I believe the largest demographic are those that are working in their own firms. Help us understand how you balance the needs of maintaining your practice, making sure that you're staying out of trouble and you're adequately representing your clients while you're serving in a leadership role.
You have to be flexible and creative. When COVID first hit the scene for us as lawyers, it impacted us like everyone. We did have the ability to be able to, many of us, transition and have home offices. If you're a solo practitioner or have a small firm, you would, if you had an IT person, or even if you didn't have an IT person, you could probably transfer your practice to a home-based office or something, because it was not safe or healthy to go into your office. Now, some people continue to go into their office, but in my case, I was not willing to take the risk with this disease I knew nothing about. And until we got our bearings and I knew and understood the medicine, and then, you know, you have political dynamics. I live in a state where our governor opened up for business before anyone else did. And to give you an insight into how odd that was, I'll use the word odd, our former president even turned to his good friend, the governor of Georgia, and said, you don't think it's too premature? Now, you know it had to be crazy when our former president turned to our governor and said it might be premature for us to open up Georgia, but he did. And so what that meant was there was an inherent conflict. People professionally who felt like, I mean, well, it's open, I can go back to the office, and business owners like me saying, oh, no, it is premature, because we're not going to have a COVID-filled environment. So pivoting, being creative, arranging for your systems to be, because you work on, we have a cloud-based, doing cloud-based, there are things that you can do are very cost-effective, and having because you've got to protect the privileged communication that you have in your possession from clients. And by the way, there are no statute of limitations that will be told because of COVID. So you still have to have the same systems in place and be creative. Sit down with your teams, no matter how small or large. You may have a one-person team, or you may have no team, or you may have a larger team, smaller team, whatever your situation. But being able to pivot and be creative of how to go forward and service those clients, because at the end of the day, as officers of the court, we have a duty to our clients, and also communicating with the clients. Our clients were going through COVID too. So in our office, when we started to trickle in, we did a staggered, going back into the office, no congregating in the common areas. We would de-COVIDize in terms of cleaning our office every Friday. When I say de-COVIDize, of course, Webster's doesn't recognize that word, but that's what I call it. When you have it washed down, every office had Lysol wipes. I had my team, take their temperature in the beginning. I provided gloves, I provided masks, I provided a sanitary workplace, and I gave everyone the option of working from home. Now, this was really unusual because prior to COVID, I would just think people were just wasting my time and wasting my money working from home if they were professional staff people. Now, I could see lawyers, because lawyers were used to, you might travel, you might always have a home office. I always did have a home office where I could work productively in addition to my office at the physical office. But for paralegals, for administrative assistants, for what about receptionists? How could they, and even if you gave them the system, sometimes that just didn't work for some people. There's some people who cannot be in a home. Maybe they have a 1-bedroom apartment and they have 2 kids. That may not be conducive to them being productive at your office. So you have to make these judgment calls of how you could manage your team, large or small. And then also PPP. What the government offered for small businesses, provided that you didn't get rid of all your staff and stuff like that, and you continued and had the payroll needs. That's the payroll protection plan. So that is also something that was helpful, and that I encourage people to take advantage of if they could qualify for it. And a lot of times it just depended on the bank that you were with. All these banks got PPP, and they had the ability to move their customers no matter what their circumstances were, and they did it. And other banks didn't. I don't know if it was luck of the draw, but those are the creative things that we had to do. And then also, if you had to downsize, then you had to downsize. There were a lot of law firms, not me, but a lot of law firms that I know that went to their landlords and they said, look, I don't know what's going to happen. we have this space in this building, or in some cases we have the whole building, and we don't have our teams in place and blah, blah, blah. So we're going to suspend our rent, but we'll put it at the back of the lease, or will you work with us? And a lot of landlords did, because they figured if they didn't want to have an empty building. They didn't want to run the risk, and they figured that there was no way they could enforce any eviction anyway. So a lot of law firms negotiated that. I did not. My landlord wasn't that, wasn't of that mindset, but I chose not to do that. But again, these are creative choices that you make when you're dealing with a pandemic in difficult times. And I found were survival tools for people. And, you might have to have family come in your office and help you organize. If you don't have the staff to do it. That's the creativity, because the bottom line, as officers of the court, the statute of limitations aren't told unless you specifically take actions to toll. And why would the defendant, I'm a plaintiff's lawyer, why would the other side agree to tolling statute? No, you had to navigate through the courts. Our courts here are so backed up. I don't know when we're going to do in-person jury trials. I don't want to try a case because I only want jury trials, and I don't want to try a case because part of what I do in my art of persuasion, to the extent that I have that, is I talk to jurors. I want to see their eyes. If I tried a case now, I'd have on a hazmat suit, mask, goggles, and look some kind of crazy. And I imagine the jurors would too. So I don't know how I'd be able to, I guess they would be laughing at me because I would look some kind of crazy and jumping once anyone came close and spraying Lysol. I had a mediation in March, the beginning of March, my last in-person mediation. And we had it scheduled. So I said, okay, I'll go forward. It was the first part of March. I'll go forward with the mediation. And there were four of us in the huge conference room and 2 other people in that office space. I walked in with wipes, Lysol, and Clorox. And I wiped down and sprayed. I think I caught someone in the face with my Lysol. I sprayed and wiped down every part of that conference room, because I said, if I'm going to do this, and I said, for sure, this is my last mediation. Even I was coughing at the Lysol, and I had on glasses, 2 or 3 masks, didn't want to touch anything, gloves that I was changing every 5 minutes. We got the case settled though. But I said, I'm not doing this anymore, because it's kind of, and ironically, of those 2 staff people that were there that were managing the office, one of them died a month later from COVID. So I didn't have to have any more examples of how I needed to be cautious, because I was going to be cautious. But during that time, that the first part of March, when we weren't quite sure, I did a mediation, but they had to suffer. And I wiped down. I don't think that office had been cleaned that well since whatever. Because literally I wiped down. I had no shame. I want y'all to understand, I'm talking about Clorox bleach. I don't want you to think I'm talking about the wipes. I'm talking about Clorox bleach, because I want to live. I want to live.
Well, CK, we really appreciate your presentation. We have about 10 minutes left, and it just seems like it was yesterday that you were sworn in, and you're almost kind of toward the back end, or the back 9 of your presidency. And you provide us a lot of good tips. And can you speak to what you know now? What would you do differently, if anything? And what surprised you most about being bar president?
Let me take the first part. What would I do differently based on what I know now? I probably, and the only factor that really was different was COVID. It took us maybe, I don't know, Marlon, you were head of the task force. I think you had been involved in the COVID task force beforehand, because I came in July. And so immediately I knew, actually before I even I was sworn in, that you were going to head the task force. And I would have maybe mobilized, I did the big stuff and got the leadership in place. I probably just anticipating that COVID was going to be with us the whole year, I may have mobilized 100 more volunteers right away. Because when we started doing our work for the presidential elections, it was all hands on deck. We had over 7,000 lawyers poised to do whatever we needed to do. And it would have been great if I had 100 volunteers for each of we have 8 affiliates, to do more work with the affiliate chapters. A lot of the affiliate chapters were doing their own election protection work. That would have been one thing, but at the end of the day, we had more volunteers than the NBA has ever had with the election protection efforts with our partners. But we were really, really pounding the pavement and building coalitions with our grassroots organizations in the field. So I would have done that. I would have been more aggressive on that front. What would I have done differently? I don't know. I feel like I'm doing what I need to be doing. You can always do something better. Perhaps, I think I heard there was when I came in and I was listening to the presentation before, I think there's a bar president that was saying she sends thank you notes to everyone. And she has all this. I'm a thank you note person, but during COVID, I got like the young folks, I was sending thank you emails. But when I receive a thank you note, and I've received really so many from our members for different things, it warms my heart. So I've started fairly recently sending out handwritten thank you notes. And I probably should have done that from the beginning versus the emails, because the handwritten to me means you took the time and effort to pen something and to put a stamp on it. And I think it goes much further than even an email saying thank you. Look, some people never say thank you, so I get it. But I really believe that at a minimum, you must say thank you to people to their face, by email, and now I'm going to handwritten. That's why, Marlon, every opportunity I have, I say thank you to you. Wherever I see you, even when you're not there, I tell people about you because of the extraordinary work that you and so many others have done.
Well, we have a question from our audience, and the question covers mentorship. And can you talk about your perspective of being a mentor and the importance of that role and helping the next generation?
Mentoring is critically important. I have about 65 mentees. Some of them are law students, a couple of them are college students, 4 of them are college students, and the rest are lawyers at different intervals in their career. And the way that I mentor is because my time is compromised, but I feel the need to give as much as I can to anyone who wants me to, frankly. I don't have there's no big criteria. It's whoever feels that I can help them. And I always tell people my schedule is a little jacked up, but so if you can deal with the jacked upness of my schedule, I'm there. And a lot of times I'll design a plan for my mentees based on where they are. They might be transitioning from the public sector to the private sector, private to public, big firm to little firm, starting whatever it is, going through crises with the bar, all of that. And I just believe it's critically important for each of us to serve as mentors to young lawyers. That's why this pipeline that we're starting, where all Boston students are a member of the MBA, is important, because we want to show them the right way to do things. I'm tired of seeing so many of our lawyers get into bar issues unknowingly because no one has ever mentored them. No one sat down and talked and said, hey, wait a minute. Are you doing this? Because if not, you need to be doing this. Communication is critical with your bar. When I was coming out, just like now, I call that hotline and that bar guidance thing that I have, I use it more in Georgia than my other jurisdictions, so much that when I called one time, the receptionist said, CK, is that you? Embarrassing moment, but because, but it's the general counsel of the Georgia bar. You call and you can get ethical and professionalism questions answered, and they'll give you guidance. Well, that's like free legal advice. That's like having your free ethics counselor. So one of the things I tell everyone, communication with the bar, your bar is important, because when there's a close call, you need to have your letter that I call it a CYA, when you consulted with the bar and they gave you advice on how to handle a dicey situation if you're ever challenged. And you may never be challenged, but you never know if you're going to be challenged, because I will tell you, if you live long enough and represent people long enough, somebody's going to say, you know what, I don't like what you did. And by the way, that fee that I gave you, I'd like a part of that, because I don't think, I've already spent all my money. So I'd like a part of your fee. That could happen. And it's astounding. And it's something that you just can't believe. But if it happens, you have to be positioned to be able to address those concerns. And be positioned to minimize the likelihood of that happening. So you paper everything. And so I spend quite a bit of time of talking to lawyers about that. And I knock on wood every time, because I know what it is to be in a difficult position. But if you don't have a lifeline, we all do. By the way, we were there in law school. That's not new for Black lawyers. But you have to have lifelines and know how to navigate. And the only way that can happen is if you have mentors, plural. Don't just try to get one person, plural. You might see someone who you've seen in trial. You say, whoa, I'd love to have that person's style. And then you take bits and pieces, you see someone else, you take bits and pieces of that. And the same thing with mentoring. You want to have as many as you can because so many people are busy and may not be able to be your sole mentor. So I think mentoring is critically important, Marlon.
In the remaining few minutes, if you can kind of speak to the issue of just encouraging people to step up to serve in leadership roles of our bars of color, our affiliate chapters. We've talked about some of the challenges. We've talked about the stress and making sure that you're organized. But can you speak to the importance of these organizations for our profession, for our country, and why you recommend that attorneys step up to become leaders of our affiliate chapters?
Absolutely. We need these bar associations. If you are African American, if you're Black, if you're a person of color, we need these organizations to breathe. Do you hear me? We need them to breathe. Just as George Floyd said, "I can't breathe." You will find yourself in a situation where you, as a lawyer, believe figuratively that you can't breathe. And these organizations will help to groom, to shape, to teach, and to counsel you to breathe, because nobody is loving Black lawyers, by the way. Racism is alive and well. So we have to learn to nap, no matter if you are the uber corporate lawyer in a big law firm, or you have your own firm, you do tax work, you do civil rights work, you do opioid litigation, whatever it is, or you work for the government, you're a prosecutor, you are going to, at some point, usually right away, need these bar associations to live and prosper as a lawyer. Whether it has to do with just the mentoring, certainly you can go to the American Bar Association and get, your CLE credits and all that, but there's something very special that you get in these bars, in addition to getting all the CLE credits that you need, because they give you that extra added oomph to be able to go out and sometimes fight the good fight. And by the way, fighting the good fight is not a litigation fight. It's a fight of life if you're a lawyer, if you're a Black lawyer. You have to put on your armor every day and fight, because trust me, people don't want to hear you. You have to make them hear you. You may not appreciate that. So these organizations they arm you with that. I feel rejuvenated. They rejuvenate you in the way that you need to be. So leadership in the organizations gives you another level of rejuvenation, because then you're in a position to impart all the pearls of wisdom that so many have fed and bled into you, into others. And there's nothing more gratifying than seeing someone that you've mentored, one of your mentees, do well. Classic example, Chris Stewart. Some of you may know him. Chris Stewart is a past president of one of our affiliate chapters, but Chris Stewart was a law clerk at the Gary firm when I was a partner there. And I have been his work mother since that time. He is my child. So I can, and so when I see Chris Stewart do the things he did, we knew he was going to be a superstar, because back in the day, before PowerPoints, people even knew what they were, he came at his interview and did a PowerPoint presentation on why we need to hire him. We were like, absolutely, we need to hire him. But his innovation is creativity, and so he's evolved in a way that could have anticipated. But of course, like my own children, I do take credit a little bit for doing something to help Chris Stewart along the way, because we all need mentors. So it does something for you when you see someone you've mentored do so well and make a difference, not just in his community, but in the country and in the world. And that's what our bars are about. The next level of judges, the next level of leaders in law firms, the next level of law professors, the next level of Uber to the Uber of the Uber. We don't get there on our own. We get there because we have bought into a system that we need to breathe. So I would encourage you all to lead in these organizations, to make the sacrifice. What's a year of my life? I mean, I've had some years that were real kind of interesting. A year of my life giving to organizations that I love is nothing. It's a drop in the bucket. It's a way of saying thank you for giving me so much. I've been a lawyer for almost 34 years. What's 1 year? 1 year is nothing, but it gives me so much gratitude if I can make a difference for an organization that I love and has given me so much. So that's why you need to run. That's why you need to lead, and don't be ashamed of it. And if you don't win the first time, run again. When is not winning the first time ever stopped us as a people? If so, we would never have made it over on those slave ships, because we were losing 100 miles an hour on those slave ships. But some of us, and they're all of our ancestors, made it to this United States of America, and we're still here. So don't let defeat one time or another stop you. Still lead.
Well, thank you so much, CK. I see we have our current president of the Cleveland Metropolitan Bar Association, Joe Gross. I see him on the line. Joe is our current president. He's been a longtime member of the Cleveland Metropolitan Bar Association. He was the prior vice president. He served as treasurer and has just been a workhorse for the organization for so many years. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to Joe Gross, who has some special words on behalf of the Cleveland Metropolitan Bar Association.
Thank you. So great to meet you, but you look familiar. So maybe our paths have crossed before.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Marlon. CK, your and the National Bar Association's effort to get computers for all the Say Yes schools, including the schools in the Cleveland Metropolitan School District, is so appreciated. Our Bar Association, which supports the schools in the Cleveland and East Cleveland districts with our 3 Rs program and several other pipeline programs, know that small gestures can mean great things for some. And I'm sure that your and the MBA's efforts to get computers in the hands of those who need them to do their schoolwork has provided opportunities to so many students here who really needed them here and all across the country. Because of your efforts, the CMBA, the Cleveland Metropolitan Bar Association, is making you an honorary member.
Yes!
And
Yes, thank you.
Well,
Oh, wow.
I'm so glad to let you know this and to read you the proclamation that we're sending you along with a small token of our appreciation.
Wow. Wow.
So the Cleveland Metropolitan Bar Association declares C.K. Hoffler to be an honorary CMBA member and friend of the 3 Rs in recognition of the extraordinary efforts benefiting the students of the Cleveland schools. Whereas the core values of the Cleveland Metropolitan Bar Association include conscious inclusion and community advancement, and the mission of our 3 Rs program is to promote access to justice and public education. Whereas the CMBA's 3 Rs Committee, in partnership with the Cleveland Metropolitan and East Cleveland school districts, wishes to bridge the digital divide for students in Cleveland and East Cleveland schools. Whereas the National Bar Association has joined as a partner in this effort to put computers and other devices in the hands of students to improve their access to our technology. Whereas C.K. Hoffler, president of the National Bar Association, has made extraordinary personal efforts to secure additional partners to bridge the digital divide for students in Cleveland and East Cleveland schools and across the country. Whereas the CMBA, its Inclusion and Diversity Committee, and the 3 Rs Committee wish to express their sincere gratitude and appreciation to Ms. Hoffler. Therefore, be it resolved that C.K. Hoffler shall, as of this date, become an honorary CMBA member and friend of the 3 Rs for her remarkable efforts to bridge the digital divide and creating greater access to technology for Cleveland and East Cleveland schools. Presented by Rebecca Rupert McMahon, CMBA CEO, Felisa Turner Howard, Agency of the Inspector General, Cuyahoga County of Ohio, Chair of the CMBA's Inclusion and Diversity Committee, and our VP of Inclusion and Diversity, and William Eady from Eady Hill Trial Lawyer, who's chair of our 3Rs committee. Thank you so much, and it's my pleasure to be making you our honorary member.
Wow. Well, so I'm rarely speechless, right? Because obviously I just love to talk and talk and talk. Marlon had to just move me along, say, okay, CK, it's time to wrap up. But I am, touched really beyond what I can express for this honor. And it's a great honor. It's just a great honor. And I can't thank you all enough. I mean, I'm just so touched. It's a privilege for me to be an honorary member. And I'm so grateful. I'm grateful for the work that you all do in your communities. I'm grateful for the opportunity that you all have given me really to serve, and giving me this honor means so much to me, so much to me. So thank you. So to you, Mr. President, who I believe I've met before because you look familiar.
I think it might have been on Star Trek, right?
No! I'm a Trekkie though. I am a Trekkie. But to Marlon, my good friend Marlon, thank you as well. To all of those all the names that you mentioned, I started taking notes and I said, I'm just going to say everyone. Thank you all for giving me and bestowing this honor on me. And I will not take it lightly, because it is really probably one of the more incredible things that has happened to me during my bar year. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
Well, we appreciate you, CK, and all your work and helping with the Digital Divide Project and going out and getting sponsors. And we really, really appreciate that. So I want to also just thank Ron Johnson, who served as our moderator, Judge Ronald Adrian, who is the founder of the MBA affiliate, the Norman S. Minor Bar. Also, Brandolyn Cook from the Ohio Hispanic Bar, Neil Begat, and Heather Zerke, who's our general counsel. And also, I want to thank Joe Gross, our president. And last but not least, I want to thank you. It was a marvelous presentation. You gave everyone some great tips, not only in terms of how to plan, but how to build an effective team and have an effective year. We're very, very proud of you and all the great work that you've done on behalf of the National Bar Association. You've had a great year, and we really appreciate all of your hard work. We really, know all the planning that went involved with it, and we appreciate you. And so this is just a small token of our appreciation. So thank you so very, very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Marlon. Thank you, everyone.